Good evening and welcome to the February 3rd, 2025 meeting, the City of Summit Zoning Board of Adjustment. My name is Scott Loikitz. I am the chair for the Zoning Board. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. In accordance with New Jersey Statute 10:4-10, adequate notice of the special meeting has been provided to a newspaper of record, then posted here in City Hall. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. For the benefit of the interested public, this meeting is being live streamed on the city's YouTube page, also broadcast on Summit's government channel, which is Comcast Channel 34 and Verizon Channel 30. The transcript of this meeting is also being taken using video and audio, so we need all speakers to utilize one of the microphones in the room. Please note that fire exits are to my right, your left, and at the back of the room where you entered. The city has a listening system to assist the hearing impaired. If anyone needs hearing assistance, please obtain the system at the dais and return it thereafter. Ms. Sulios, please call the roll.
Sure. Chairman Loikitz?
Here.
Mr. Steiner?
Here.
Mr. Yuko is excused. Mr. Nelson?
Here.
Vice Chair Zahn is excused. Mr. Curran is excused. Mr. Malay?
Here.
Ms. Chifo is excused. Mr. Feskins is excused. Mr. Chanchilli?
Here.
Mr. Neering?
Here.
You have a quorum. You may proceed.
Thanks, Stephanie. Annie Ball is the zoning board's attorney. Mr. Ball advises the board members on matters of law, is the key interface with the applicant's attorney. Mr. Ball does not vote on the applications. Stephanie Sulios is a city employee and is the zoning board secretary. Ms. Sulios works with the applicants on preparing their applications, planning our agendas, and keeping our meeting minutes. Ms. Sulios also does not vote on these applications. Also present are experts who are hired annually by the board to provide input to the board. Tonight, we have Marie Raffet from Collier's Engineering and Ed Snikes from Burgess Associates. These experts are seated at the table to the right, the public's left. They also do not vote on these applications. Our board consists of 7 regular members and up to 4 alternates. All members can participate in the hearings tonight, but a maximum of 7 can vote. Most applications require a simple majority to be approved. Before we enter executive session to vote on the application, you'll be advised as to how many votes are required. Each case will begin with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the process and the variances that are required. We then hear from any additional expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why the variances are needed. The board experts, followed by the board members, may ask questions of the applicant, their attorney, and the expert witnesses. Due to recent cases running excessively long, we strongly encourage applicants and their experts to give brief and concise testimony so we may get to as many cases as possible in a given evening. Once the board members and the board professionals have completed their questioning, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. This is not the time to tell us what you think about the case. That opportunity comes at the end of the hearing. Please be careful how you phrase your questions. They should not be preceded with a statement about the case, but should be a direct question to the witness. Also, before you ask your questions, please clearly state your name, spell your last name, provide your address. It is important that our court reporter be able to keep a clear and accurate public record. After all witnesses have been heard, members of the audience have their second opportunity to speak, and at that time you may express your opinion, positive or negative, about the application. Then the public hearing is closed and we enter into executive session where board members discuss the case and then vote. You will be able to listen to our executive session, but will not normally be able to participate in our discussion. I ask that each applicant and their attorney, if present, come up and give a brief synopsis of their anticipated testimony tonight, including the number of witnesses and whether or not they can finish their presentation within 30 minutes. All right, and tonight we will begin with 47 Oakland Place.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. James Weber on behalf of the applicants. This is a request to adjourn this in order to have a full board available to hear this matter.
Understood.
April 21st.
Does that work?
That works.
Okay, great.
And waiving the time frame to act,
We do.
and I assume requesting to carry without further notice.
That's correct.
All right.
Excellent. Can I get a motion to carry this case to the 21st?
So moved. Make the motion.
Get a second?
Second.
All right, great. Stephanie?
Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Mr. Malay?
Yes.
Mr. Chanchuli?
Yes.
Mr. Nearing?
Yes.
Chairman Loikitz?
Yes.
The motion carries.
See you on April 21st, Mr.
Thank
Weber.
you.
Thank you. Okay. So our second and final case of the evening, Oak Knoll School.
Good evening. Hillary Alls from Dempsey & Sheehan, representing the applicant Oak Knoll School of the Holy Child, Inc., regarding property located at 44 Blackburn Road and 72 Prospect Street, Block 3103, Lots 2 and 3 in the R15 zone. As a quick recap from the last hearing, Oak Knoll School is an existing permitted conditional use that has been located at this site for 100 years. The school is an inherently beneficial use and is protected under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000. At the last hearing, the board heard from Jennifer Landis, the head of school, Ralph Rosenberg, the architect, and Dan Chenal, the civil engineer. At that hearing, there were questions and some concerns raised over the proposed new egress on Blackburn Road. So the school and their team have worked on the plan since that hearing to address those comments and concerns, resulting in a redesign of the parking area that will use the existing entrance and exit on Blackburn Road. Eliminate the previously proposed egress driveway, and will result in an additional 10 spaces on site for a total of 31 new spaces, where 21 were previously proposed. Dan Chenal is here tonight to discuss this redesign and answer any outstanding questions from the last hearing, followed by Craig Paragoy, the traffic engineer, Marla Roller, the landscape architect, and concluding with John Barry, the planner. And for the record, I just want to note that the applicant did receive the fire chief's report after the last hearing, and agrees to comply with that report as a condition of approval. So if there's no other questions for me, I will call the first witness.
And Ms. Ols, this
Yes.
exhibit will be submitted or has been submitted to Stephanie?
It will be submitted,
Okay,
yes, in
great.
his testimony.
This is the one that I spoke of the last hearing.
Oh, you did? Okay, then it's already been.
Okay.
I'm not sure which number it is.
Is this the rendered site plan?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so that is
I think it's A2.
Exhibit A2.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So the first witness is Dan Chenal.
Good evening again, Chairman, members of the board. Daniel Chenal, principal of the firm Dynamic Engineering. I understand that I'm still under oath and my license is still in good standing.
Put it on the record.
Yes,
So,
and just to confirm for the record, you were previously sworn at the last hearing, you remain under oath.
yes, that's correct.
Thank
My license is still in good standing. So just referring back, a quick recap on the last hearing. The exhibit that's up on the screen right now, this is Exhibit A2. It's the rendered overall site plan, essentially the same as Sheet 4 within the site plan package. So this is what we spoke of the last hearing. This is what at that point was essentially the proposed parking lot located behind Mulcahy Hall. So it was a parking lot with 19 new parking spaces. It lost 3 parking spaces with the drive-through that would kind of cut through and access. And as you heard in the recap, we did previously propose this driveway back out to Blackburn, which would be a one-way exit-only driveway. So understanding some of the neighbors' concerns that were brought up in the last meeting, we're essentially now looked and came up with a new concept to eliminate this driveway. So with the loss of this driveway, those 3 parking spaces that would be eliminated on the street that can only be used when the school is closed, those will no longer be lost. On top of that, we'll no longer be seeking a light spill variance because there will be no need to illuminate that driveway, so no more light spilling over the property. And we'll also be maintaining that existing hedgerow of mature vegetation that exists on a portion of the frontage there, since that driveway is no longer needed. So the next exhibit that I'll share is something the board has not seen yet, and it is our proposed essentially redesign of this parking area. I believe this would be A3. So this is Exhibit A3. It's entitled Site Plan B, Exhibit 1, with a date of, it's just January 29th, 2025. So essentially what this shows is a zoomed-in portion of the site and now a redesigned parking area behind Mulcahy Hall. What you see here is the highlighted spaces were essentially the spaces that are new in comparison to what exists. So on that previous exhibit, there's those 4 existing parking spaces that are head-in fronting on Blackburn, and we previously had that driveway that went back out to Blackburn. So essentially what we did is we took a look at that existing driveway that provided access into our new parking area. We widened that a little bit, so it went from 18 feet to 24 feet in width. That's this dimension here. And what that allows you to do is essentially provide enough room behind head-in parking spaces for cars to be able to back out. So we expanded that to 24 feet and essentially looked to just continue this row of parking that fronted along Blackburn. So we went from those 4 spaces to now we have 18 spaces that front along that roadway. And then we look to then wrap this parking lot around to essentially match that previous layout to provide another 12 parking spaces plus another 2 on this access way. So previously, with the way that you entered this driveway, switching back to rendering A2, essentially just one-way access into this, no way to get back out to the existing parking area unless you went out to Blackburn. A little bit of a funky layout. With this, I feel flows a lot better under proposed conditions. You have that 24-foot wide access. You have that full row of parking in the front. It flows a lot better than existing conditions. And it actually gets us to gain an additional 10 spaces from what we previously proposed. In addition, this now complies with the parking setback from Blackburn Road, allows us to maintain that existing hedgerow and provide a minimum of 31 feet of buffer area in front of those parking spaces. So you'll see on our landscape rendering how well these parking spaces will be hidden. So the previous proposed lot added 16 new parking spaces in this area of the site. Under proposed conditions, we're now looking at 26 parking spaces in this area. So that's 10 additional spaces off the street and onto the site from what we previously proposed, which offers a further benefit to the neighbors. So to recap, under existing conditions as the site exists today, there's 140 parking spaces on site. And now with this new laid out parking area, as well as the several new spaces elsewhere on the site, we're now up to 171 parking spaces on site. So that would be a grand total of 31 less parked vehicles on the street while class is in session, essentially going from 65 park spaces on the streets to 34, so almost cutting it in half. So I see that as a really good benefit to the community, taking nearly half the spaces that we use on the street, now putting them on the site. These spaces, as previously testified, will match the existing size and striping on the site. And we're also providing now a new walkway at the head of the northernmost spaces that will provide direct pedestrian access from this new parking lot to the rear of Mulcahy Hall, as well as tie into the existing walkway throughout the remainder of the campus. This new layout does result in a slight increase in lot coverage from what we previously testified to. It's an additional 2,900 square feet. So in the grand scheme of things, it's only an additional 0.6% on the overall lot, going from 46% impervious surface coverage proposed per the last hearing up to 46.6. So as a result of this, we'll also be increasing the stormwater management design to account for the additional parking square footage while still exceeding both the city and state stormwater management quantity reduction requirements. The entirety of the new lot will be pervious pavement. So essentially, you can see, it's hard to see in the screen, but there's this dot hatch that essentially outlines and delineates the proposed pervious pavement, whereas the previous design, essentially only half of the new parking area was pervious pavement. So not only are we adding more impervious surface coverage, which results in a little bit more stormwater runoff, we are increasing the size of the stormwater management system that we previously had proposed in there to not only account for that additional impervious, but also exceed the requirements. So again, in my opinion, that'd be even a further benefit to the neighbors. I think that essentially highlights the main changes that we really wanted to go over. But Hillary, if I missed anything,
No, I
please let
think
me know.
you got it all.
Not, more than
Unless
happy to.
there's any questions from the
If there's any
board.
questions?
Any,
Last-
let's
last time-
let's have the board professionals ask questions, then we'll ask.
I'm just thinking about headlights
Mhm.
going across the street. I don't know, is that something maybe I should be asking the landscape?
Yes, she has a rendering.
Yep, she has a rendering, but this shrub row there is pretty tall and mature, which you'll see on that rendering. And also where these head-in parking spaces are, the grade dips down. Off the top of my head, I'd say about an average of 3 feet. So even with just the grade alone, the cars parked head-in there, I think there's not going to be much of an impact past the property line of the cars parked there.
So, where are the lights on this area now?
So we didn't update our lighting design yet. This is an exhibit, but I'm confident that there would be no exceedances over the property line of the maximum allowable.
I see you have a small, like, hammerhead down at the end, just to help people back out of those end spots?
Yeah, yep, down
Is that
here.
right?
Yep,
Okay.
so cars backing out have enough room to essentially turn around and exit the parking lot the same way they came back in. Our traffic expert will talk circulation, but essentially this is two-way circulation around this existing parking area versus where we only had one-way proposed.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you're going to alleviate the parking that is on the street now? I know you're taking them off the street and putting them in the parking lot, but is that just creating more space on the street so people can park? Or is there something that can be done to make sure that those spaces that were on the street are not going to be taken up by more people?
Yep, no, I understand, and as you heard from the operations of the school earlier on, there's only a certain amount of students that are essentially permitted to drive to campus, and they're not anticipating increasing enrollment, increasing the allowances of maybe juniors to drive, that wouldn't be allowed, and the number of employees that they have here today are anticipated to, stay the same. So really, we just saw it as a net reduction of the amount of cars that they have parked on the street, and now bringing them on site and freeing up additional space for the neighbors. And again, our traffic expert kind of has a parking exhibit, which then delineates the number of spaces in each area of the lot, and kind of talk through that a little bit more as well.
I think that's all I have.
Okay. Ed?
A few questions. With regard to your testimony, you were saying that the increase in impervious coverage is 2,900 square feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that increases the total to 46.6%, still needing a variance? but
Correct.
Slightly?
Yep.
Slightly more, okay. Any tree removal in this area of the design?
That is a good question. Our landscape architect does have tree removal calculations and how many she's proposing, so we can address that shortly.
Thank you. Any steep slope disturbance, any further steep slope disturbance?
That is a good question as well. In this area particularly, I don't think we identified any steep slopes, but if they are being disturbed, we'll make sure to quantify that. The steep slope disturbances are really associated with the Connolly Hall and Tisdale Hall improvements.
I think there were some small bands, but you might have been grading those areas anyway in the prior design. but
Yes.
It's something for you to take a look at.
Yep,
Give us a
absolutely.
full summary of what that would be. Thank you. And then you mentioned the light. Thank you. So there's no other changes to your stormwater basin design other than the pervious pavement that's been.
That's correct, just expanding it. We didn't fully rerun the numbers and the calculations, but with the increase in impervious surface coverage in comparison to the increase the size of the basin, we know that will not only offset that increase, but further exceed our reductions.
Okay, thank you. No further.
Thanks, Ed. Questions from the board? Go ahead,
I was
Mr.
just wondering
Neary.
how much, last episode was asked how much you exceeded the requirements.
Yep.
Did you do that calculation?
Yeah, so overall, for the entire area of the site, we are essentially 21% below what's permitted to essentially run off the site. The runoff rates is what we look at. Volume is not something that is mandated by the state or local government. So we look at rates, essentially how quickly the
Yes.
stormwater leaves the site. So we are 21% below the maximum permitted under proposed conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
So for someone who's not an expert on water runoff, what does that mean?
So essentially, the state, there's three main storms that we have to design to. It's a 210, 100-year design storms, both for current and future projected rainfall rates. So current, future projected is year 2100 rainfall rates that they would project, significantly higher than current rainfall rates. And we have to meet reductions for each one of those storms. So for example, the 2-year storm, we need to reduce to the rate, so the runoff rate, 50% of the existing. So whatever the existing flow rate is leaving the site under existing conditions, we have to cut that in half is the maximum permitted to leave under proposed conditions. And then for the 10-year storm, we have to reduce that by 25%, and the 100-year storm, we have to reduce that by 20%. So essentially, combining all of those storms and looking at it as a single percentage against the regulations, it is 21% below what we are permitted to discharge from the site under proposed conditions. Tried to make that a little
Any
better.
clearer. So,
So I think they're allowed up to a certain percentage, and they're gonna be 21% under what they're allowed to
do we
run
know
off.
what that
So,
percentage is?
right,
Like 21%?
21%.
How many gallons, how many?
So,
Like, I know, like, Jeremy, I can't let any water run off my property or my house. Just can't, I'm not allowed to do it. So I don't pave my driveway, it sinks into the ground. So you're kind of doing that here, but you're throwing these percentages out there, but that, I don't know if the public understands it, because I know I don't.
yeah, so when you look at stormwater as a whole, so a lot of people think volume, they think quantity. But when you're dealing with, especially a site like this that has high bedrock, water's not able to get back into the ground either way. So it sits there and it runs off the site.
So with that in mind,
Yep.
how does this impervious pavement work?
So the pervious pavement is a
Pervious,
system that's
sorry.
designed that allows the water to seep through the pavement. There's larger voids in the pavement, meaning that water can get through it. And then there's a large, essentially stone bed below the pavement. That stone bed, again, has voids in it, so stormwater is able to be held in that big, essential pile
So
of
it's like
stone
a dry
below
well,
it.
it's a large dry
A
well.
large dry well, exactly. And then we have a outlet control structure, which is essentially just a manhole with a series of different holes in the wall. And as the stormwater elevation rises within that stone storage bed, it starts to seep out through different holes. So the smaller storm event has a real small hole to go through, so that gets held back and releases a lot slower. And then these bigger storm events come up, that stormwater, the basin fills up a little bit more, maybe it'll hit that next hole in the wall to allow a little bit more stormwater out, so that rate goes up, that it discharges a little bit quicker for the larger storm events, but still less than under existing conditions. So essentially, it's again, it goes back to the analogy of kind of looking at either a big traffic jam or even, a bag of water with a hole in it with a little tiny hole, only a little bit of water comes out once and a bunch is being held back in the bag, or if you just turn the bag upside down and dump it all out, that's essentially be no control. So essentially we're creating a vessel to hold back this stormwater and release it at a slower rate to allow the infrastructure downstream of the site to be able to get that big first flush of the storm where they might not have the capacity to convey additional stormwater. We're now holding that on our site for a longer period of time, allowing those pipes to essentially clear out, and we release it over a longer period of time.
And this 21%, that's under, you're 21% under what's allowed?
Correct.
Is that just for the new pavement and the building construction as well?
That is for any area of the
Entire
site
site?
that no, not the entire site, but any area that we disturb. So
Okay.
essentially, any area on the site that we disturb, we are required to manage the stormwater for that site. So for those disturbance areas, we're 21% below what the state or the local government would allow us to release.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up question, what about the entire site?
The entire site, we don't look at the entire site as a whole. Again, you're only looking at those areas that you disturb. So the rest of the site will continue to drain as it currently does today. We don't need to further reduce those as we're not
Okay.
disturbing them. So no change for that.
Well,
the
but could you
areas of-
give us that number just so for our edification as to what we're going to have as a final result
I'm
for the
conf-
whole property?
For the whole property, so again, the areas that
Are
we're
we
just-
going to be over or under? And
Under.
if so, by how much?
you're still gonna be under by existing, and it would be that 21% below what would be permitted under proposed conditions.
That's
So
what you're
even if we
disturbing,
added-
but what about the gross number?
Correct, so that gross number is gonna remain unchanged, existing versus proposed.
And what is that? What is that gross number?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, we'd have to analyze the entire
Okay,
site.
we're
That would-
obviously not finishing tonight. Perhaps you could look it up and tell us.
Yeah, but it's not gonna change as far as the impact to the neighborhood. It makes it better either way for what we're proposing. So we're still reducing, and it's a benefit when compared to existing conditions, because there's less stormwater leaving the site as quickly as it does
Okay.
today.
Let me go on to a different subject, if I may, parking. When you testified before, I believe you said that the new parking lot was going to be utilized by faculty. And so we'd have experienced drivers that wouldn't have a problem with the smaller than normal parking spaces. What are the new parking spaces going to be used by?
That's,
So this is proposed for visitor and employees, but there are additional spaces on site in other areas that are gonna be used, where you can bring more students on site. And those are gonna be the same size that current students are already, that already park on site will be.
Was there any consideration of perhaps taking one or two less parking spaces added and giving students the wider parking spaces that new drivers need?
it's a good question. Our consideration was getting as many vehicles that are parked on the road off the road and into the site to essentially benefit the community as a whole. 6 inches in a parking space is, if
Big
you were to
deal.
pull into one of these parking spaces, I'm sure that you wouldn't be able to tell if it's a 9-foot space by versus an 8.5-foot space. 6 inches in a parking space is very minute. I understand what you're saying. If, again, we're adding 10 more spaces than what we previously proposed, if the size of the parking space is that much of a concern, losing a couple spaces to make them wider, I don't think I'd have an issue with that either. But I don't think you're going to see much of a difference. Honestly, in my professional opinion, 6 inches in the size of a parking space.
Go outside and look at the car that's parked next to me.
Is it my truck?
And we have a full parking lot.
I think it also depends too, where the other spaces are located. So, the other spaces that are on site might be being reallocated.
That's why I asked about these
Yeah.
specific ones, as
Yeah,
to
these are
what they were going to be
specifically
used
for
for.
employees and visitors.
Okay.
Sorry, I think we might have touched on this at the last hearing, but you just remind me again, what's preventing you from, you're building a brand-new parking space here. Why wouldn't you connect it to the smaller carriage house parking and then get some relief from Blackburn and have some exiting onto Larned?
Again, it was just the prior resolution that didn't allow us to use that driveway. We wanted to make sure that we weren't essentially changing the flow in the way the site works today, and just provide additional space off the site.
But there is an option if the board would prefer.
Yes.
We do have that option that we could show you.
Yes.
If you'd like to see it.
We would like to see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so then my next exhibit would essentially be Exhibit A4.
Yes.
So this is exactly what you were asking about. It's essentially now extending the end of that parking area to provide access back out
That's
to.
I'm
the
sorry,
truck.
not on the prospect, although I'm glad you're showing us this,
Yeah,
so the board can
that
see
was
it.
my next
But
question.
I'm saying connect what you're proposing here and just keep going to Larned, right? You already have parking spots in front of the carriage house, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
It's a
you have
gravel
curb
driveway.
cut onto Larned existing,
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm asking, why not just come
Because
up?
the neighbors were not,
Were these
amenable.
discussed with the neighbors?
yes,
Okay.
that was discussed with. the
Understood.
neighbors, so.
Okay, so this is the proposed solution then?
This
to-
is another option
Right.
To provide
to
another
provide another,
way out
Was-
of that parking.
right.
And was this discussed with the neighbors, and what was their,
This was just discussed at our previous hearing, because
Oh,
it was
okay.
brought up concerns, why not just extend the driveway from Mulcahy to that new parking
I mean,
area.
you're moving it from one public thoroughfare to another, which I mean, that, now.
Will your traffic expert testify as to whether or not this will provide relief to
Yes.
Blackburn? Okay, great. Any other questions?
This 0.6%, like, what is that?
Ed's got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't want to cut you.
No,
No
okay.
worries.
I wasn't here at the last meeting, so forgive me for bringing this up. It just occurred to me as I looked at the plans this evening or earlier today. Could you go over to the stormwater basin that's proposed along, I guess that's the southerly property line? Do you have that on there, Exhibit?
So this is referring back now to Exhibit A2.
Correct. The exit movement for some of the maintenance access into and out of that basin seems to be fighting the grades to me. It seems to be kind of trying to go back uphill, and then you're going uphill in grade. Is there any way of, if you were to zoom in where your label is there, that big white square, is there any way of coming out 90 degrees towards the school itself, thereby reducing any disturbance on that, I guess that's the east, westerly side of the basin?
Yep, I mean,
Follow what I'm saying?
that's a good question. We could certainly take a look at that, but we were essentially working with the grade and using that almost as a little bit of a swale to kind of catch the stormwater that is further to the east and directed towards our basin.
I didn't know if you can save more trees or add more buffering on that side, because I know your landscape architect will be coming up to discuss this, that if they had more area in that location, they could potentially buffer the adjacent homes a little bit better.
So there is additional landscaping proposed in that area, which she'll testify to,
It's food for
based on
thought.
comments from those neighbors.
Okay, because you have only 10 feet there, that's why I was trying to get a little bit more room, if you had room. But I'm not an engineer, so that's why I thought I'd ask that question.
Understood.
Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, so back to my question, the 0.6% is 2,900 square feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm glad you brought this bio retention thing up. Is there a way to run that to the new pervious material that's installed, so it can drain into that and not so much to the city's sewer storm system? Because doesn't this all drain to the city storm system?
Including the pervious basins.
Oh,
They do
too?
as well. Yeah, there's no
Okay.
infiltration capabilities on the site
No, 'cause
based on
of
our
bedrock.
testing. Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Great. Anyone else? All right. Questions from the public for this witness? Questions only, please. We've got someone there.
Are you,
Eric Nicely, ERICNICELY. I've got. some
Your
spec-
address, sir?
56 Blackburn Road.
Thank you.
I've got probably a lot of specific questions, but that's probably because we've been through this and we have 12,000 gallons worth of water tanks up above, so just be patient as to why I ask the questions. So what I call the pond, or you call it a retaining well, is it collecting water just from the additions to the gym, or is it collecting water from all of the gym and also from the parking lots to be able to get to the coverage that they ask, or is this just you're covering the piece that's been added or disturbed as the appropriate terms are defined?
For which basin? The above ground one we were just talking?
I was mainly talking the one behind the
Yep,
gym.
absolutely.
But I'm just trying to understand a little bit, because the distinction of disturbed was generally you had to catch the 100-year storm based upon what's disturbed, not based on what's already there. And if your prior approvals were close to the threshold, even though you say it will be better than it was, it's still not going to be to 21 is my question. But I'm not trying to get to that. I'm just trying to ask you, where is the water being collected from that runs into that pond?
Yep, both the open space area that's essentially surrounding or further to the south of this addition, the roof area from the addition, and portion of the existing building.
Okay, so you've
We're capturing it.
as much as you can, because this pond, in order to pump, you can't really pump the water because of the grade on the rest of the property.
Correct.
So you basically, or what you're trying to do is overcompensate by putting the water collection on the existing roof as well, to be able to compensate for the water that you can't necessarily
correct.
Spot on.
Okay, just trying to make sure I understand
Absolutely.
what's going on. The next question has to do with the parking spaces, and and I know you talked about it won't drip light into the road,
The new layout?
the new layout, but will there be parking lights in the parking lot in addition to the ones that are already in the parking lot?
Yes, so for this new parking area that's directly behind Mulcahy, that will be lit again.
Is it possible to have those outfitted with either motion sensors or turn some of them on and off at certain times of night when they're not, in theory, being utilized? I don't want people not to be safe, but I also just worry that it does seem like it's getting fairly bright in the neighborhood if we leave them on all the time. I'm not saying you can't have some of them, I'm just saying it might be nice to do something.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. That's a good suggestion. We can discuss that with operations. There's ways that these lights can either be dimmed at certain hours of the night, or some of them can be turned off. I don't think that would be an issue.
Okay,
And they can also be shielded, right? So-
Yes, absolutely.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience?
This might be, hi, Rebecca Morano, 80 Prospect Street. I'm not sure if you can answer this, or maybe the headmaster, but the juniors aren't allowed to park, but they do, up and down the street in the spring. How are you going to keep them from, there'll be extra spots on, but I'm concerned that it's not going to impact the amount of cars that are still going to be on the street. And I am, in fact, happy when those girls are parking in front of my house. I'm not upset about that, but I'm wondering how you're going to be able to control the amount of kids that park outside of the school when they're not allowed to park in the school, because I know it happens all the time.
So we, in fact, just addressed that one. Oh, sure, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, so we've become aware that more and more of them were doing that, which kind of makes sense with, as the year goes on, more of them have 17th birthdays and
Mhm.
get their licenses and so forth, and many of the parents are very happy for them to be able to start driving, but we have, last week and then again today, met with the entire junior and senior classes, confirming with them what our policies and procedures are. Saw a huge improvement today in kind of reinforcing this is what the policy is, this is what our handbook says, this is what you signed, and communications are going out to them again to reinforce that.
And can you just say what that policy is?
Oh, yes, that juniors are not to drive to school until May 1, when our seniors are on their capstone projects. So juniors they can ask permission to drive to campus or drive to school on May 1st, because that's when our senior class is on a month-long project.
How will you actually implement that?
Well, we do our best. So we have our security team, we have our dean actually did a walkabout today to do that. We, get our eyes on what we can. Now, it's not possible for us to kind of canvass the totality of the neighborhood, but we do our best to kind of keep an eye on the areas that are close to school that are likely places for them to do that.
Mhm.
And then we have our meetings with them and call them to task and get them to understand what the policy is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Brad Olson, 64 Blackburn. I'm going to follow up on the same line of questioning, so I'll save some for him in a minute. But do you know how many?
Address and stuff.
He stated that.
No, she hasn't.
I'm sorry.
What do you mean?
The witness has not identified herself.
Oh,
You're,
Jennifer Landis, head of school, Oaknall School.
she's still sworn.
Right.
Okay. I think everybody else knew that. Do you know how many parking spots are, how many cars park from, due to Oaknall on the streets
On the
currently?
surrounding streets, I do think we have that calculation. Sheet. Hillary, do you have that in front of you?
Yes. Let's see. 65 existing drivers.
65?
Yes.
How'd you calculate that?
Based on the number of employees and the number of student drivers and the number of visitors, we
So
get
it's
total
not-
drivers.
It's not based on any sort of survey? Like,
I
you
don't think
wouldn't,
anybody actually walked.
nobody's gone out and counted. Wouldn't that be appropriate thing for
I don't know
someone to do when they're coming
How
to?
you would know that they were from Oaknall? I mean, other people could be parking. They don't have
Yep.
necessarily a sticker on their car that you know.
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean, my
available.
housekeeper could park, but she's there for 2 hours, like, so, like, but,
We give hang tags to the students, our students who are permitted to drive,
Mhm.
so we'd be able to survey them, but other cars, I wouldn't necessarily know if they were, it could be a parent who's visiting briefly and then leaving, or someone else.
So
I'm
if
not
I could
sure.
just interject, do you want to just wait on that question until the traffic engineer presents? And he
Oh,
might
sure.
be able to answer
Yeah.
you better on
Yeah.
that question?
yeah, happy
Okay.
to, yeah. Because basically, I'm interested to understand what will be the impact on the reduction of,
Sure.
from what
Of
we're
course.
building, but I'll save that for,
Thank you.
while I have you, I don't know if this question was asked, so apologies if it was covered. But how much in taxes does 72 Prospect currently pay?
You know, we did get that calculation. Do you have it in front of you, Hillary? I can get that for you this evening, but I don't have it.
Is it about 52,000? That's what Zillow says.
I'll have to look.
Okay.
I don't want to confirm.
What will happen when you annex it? What will happen to that tax
I
revenue?
can't tell you. It would become part of our.
You have to
part
go
of the
through a
school.
whole process, so we just don't, I don't know.
Do you currently pay property taxes? Does
I don't
Oak Knoll
know-
currently
I don't
pay
know the
property
answer.
taxes?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not their tax
So
attorney.
we're a
No.
nonprofit.
Of course not. So assume that the 52,000 will go away, and the city will no longer earn that 52,000
That's likely.
if you annex it.
Yes, that's likely, and as it was when we did own that property for many years.
And I'll just remind the board that taxation of the properties is irrelevant for our purposes.
Thank you.
So the, let me
We
then
don't,
ask,
we
can I
don't
ask you a
consider
question?
We don't consider taxation as whether the relief can be granted to this application.
Is that a separate approval that needs to be done by the town council, or, because you're gonna be, essentially you're saying this board, this zoning board could give away property taxes without any consideration for the impact on the financials of
If a
the.
property meets an exemption, that would go through the tax assessor, and that's how it applies, but we cannot consider that on the weighing of this application and the criteria that the board is tasked with reviewing from a zoning perspective.
Okay, so like, if they wanted to annex 15 properties that accounted for $750,000 of taxes,
My answer stands.
you would not consider that impact on the city?
We cannot.
And is there a process to consider that? Outside of the zoning board? Or maybe I should,
You'd have to apply to be tax exempt, so you have to meet certain requirements.
well, that's already the case with Oak Knoll.
But not this specific piece of property would have to go through that same process, so somebody would review it.
I think we're drifting away from questions and into commentary. Let's stick to questions, please.
Those are all questions, but I will get back to this, I understand. Okay, so for the, thank you, Jennifer. Sure. Are you familiar with the flooding that already occurs down from Larned?
I've heard about it. Witnessed it.
You haven't witnessed it? Okay. So there's already a significant negative impact in that area, and part of it must be contributed by Oak Knoll. The additional 6% lot coverage you're going to go up, do you have an understanding of how much that will impact the flooding of that area?
I can tell you it'll be reduced because we're exceeding our stormwater management requirements.
You're exceeding it in which area? So my question, follow-up to Nicely's earlier, was you have the catch basin all the way on the other side of the property, which is nowhere near where the flooding areas are.
It all goes in the same direction downstream.
So what gets routed to that catch basin? Is it just the Tisdale, or is it from other areas within the property?
As I mentioned in the previous neighbor, it's capturing a portion of the overland flow near that basin, as well as a new roof area, as well as a portion of existing Tisdale Hall.
Okay, but it doesn't capture anything from anything I guess that's east of Tisdale Hall. Is that correct?
Correct, it'll be north, yep.
North, okay. Which is where, you know, all that property runs down towards Larned in that direction, whereas the major flooding. So I don't know how you can say it'll be reduced when the catch basin's all the way on the other side of the property.
All of the stormwater makes its way to the Salt Brook that is north of this site. So how that stormwater gets there, it's going through the conveyance network throughout the city and discharges to that existing Salt Brook. So we're capturing the stormwater that's generated by our area of new improvements. We're capturing it, we're holding it within a detention basin, and we're releasing it at a slower rate. So it's a benefit to the existing city's infrastructure, as we're now holding more of that stormwater on site and releasing it slower as that big first flush goes through those pipes.
Okay, understood. So you're saying the catch basin also flows down to the Salt Brook?
Correct. The whole site drains ultimately to the Salt Brook.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, the catch basin itself, is that counted against lot coverage?
The pervious pavement basins are. The above-ground bioretention basin is not, because it is landscaped. So even though the basins in the parking lot, the pervious pavement, even though they're technically pervious, they still count as lot coverage by the way of the ordinance, so we do account.
But the catch basin doesn't?
No, it's open space, so that's still, it's landscape area.
It's open space to catch other water that's being routed there, but that doesn't take up the...
Lot coverage, correct. Per city definition.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for this witness?
Ellen Becker, 92 Prospect. We're doing the pervious pavement, right?
Yes, sir.
And when we're talking our runoff rates, the way that goes over there, that would be different than if you calculated it, if you were just had, like, let's say, a traditional asphalt pavement, right?
No, that we still calculate like the runoff coefficients and everything exactly the same.
But is the runoff coefficient between the pervious pavement and, let's say, just straight up a good old-fashioned asphalt base with just your asphalt cover,
the
that's
same.
the same, let's call it matriculation factor. It's the dead same.
Yes.
So you still get the same runoff rate between pervious pavement versus a straight asphalt pavement.
Correct, but everything's being captured in the pervious pavement, it's not running off anywhere.
So how is the runoff rate the same between like if we just paved it with just concrete, right, and we did a broom finish on it, and then we put pervious pavement, the runoff would be the same between those two surfaces?
Yeah, it technically just gets to the basin quicker.
So the runoff rate is affected. If something gets there quicker, the rate is affected.
No, because we're looking at the rates downstream, essentially where we're tying back into the existing infrastructure of the city.
But not on the actual pavement itself.
Well, all that's included within our stormwater calculation, so, open space area is calculated differently, but for the rules that we follow, essentially, pervious pavement is treated the same exact way that regular asphalt pavement would be.
So
And it's actually a method of being more conservative than if it was to be considered a lower coefficient, like something would go.
So it does matter between what your surface is. It
Correct.
does affect the runoff rate. Previously, it just said it does not matter. The pervious pavement does give you a different runoff rate, obviously, because you have less stuff gliding over the top of it than if you just did a real tight concrete finish, right?
Technically, it'd be slower, I'm saying our design.
Technically, it would be slower, very much. Yes, yes,
But
very,
it's more
now we're getting somewhere.
conservative. It's more conservative by using it as a solid, by equating it the same as normal pavement.
So if you switched over, it wouldn't matter, so why bother going to the pervious pavement if it doesn't affect if it doesn't affect anything to do with the parking lot, why not just go with the good old-fashioned cheap asphalt pavement?
Because this is a green infrastructure best management practice for stormwater management. It's a way of, yes, we're paving the lot, but it's still pervious, and we're using that as a way to not only meet the stormwater requirements for the new pavement that we're adding, but also a benefit to the rest of the site.
because it does affect the way the water either matriculates, or they're using rates, or just pure gallons. There's some difference between the pervious pavement and just good old-fashioned concrete, right?
Yeah, the pervious pavement we can use as a basin. Regular concrete we
Okay.
cannot.
So there is a big difference between using the two, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's great. And then, I think last time we talked about the, lifespan of this pervious pavement. It has pores in it, it needs to be treated, right? We have to treat those. And what is in your professional opinion, of a parking lot at a 5% slope like we talked about last time? What's the expected lifetime of that effectiveness of the pervious pavement before it has to be, before it works, not just to become asphalt?
It's a great question. It all comes down to wear and tear, how often it's driven on.
Best guess, 5 years?
I would say 10 to 20 years.
So it's possible in 10 years, if it's not maintained properly, it could be less than that, right?
Again, as I mentioned at the previous
But
hearing,
the
we are
question is, it
required.
could be less than that if not properly maintained, right?
Yes, but we are required, again, to provide a maintenance manual that is deeded to the property, that the owner is then responsible for maintaining and ensuring that the way
That's
that these
fair enough,
basins
fair enough.
work.
Fair enough, okay.
So yes, if there's
But
an
it-
issue with the pavement and it's not functioning the way it should be, it'll be on Oak Knoll to replace that, to make sure they still comply with their stormwater management
Okay.
system for the life of the system. It lives with the property no matter who the owner is.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a real quick question?
Sure.
How do you know it's not working?
If there's no water getting through it. There's
Okay.
there's specific tests that are required to make sure that there's permeability through the system.
Question, how often those tests performed?
So the maintenance manual that we will have to submit, we need to do quarterly inspections to make sure it's functioning, or after major rain events. But if there is an issue that, the neighbors mention or anything like that, they have the ability to contact the city, and that's why we make sure that O&M gets deeded and is recorded with the county and on file, so that there's always a responsible party that is, required to make sure that their system is functioning the way it should be.
Thank you.
We did retain jurisdiction, right?
I believe so.
Did we not retain jurisdiction for 2 years?
Yes,
So
that was
that-
noted last
Just
time.
reminding people that we have, and the applicant has agreed to having the city retain drainage jurisdiction for 2 years.
Correct.
Hi, Isabel Rogers, 92 Prospect Street. Quick question about lighting. I know you guys said you don't have the plan yet. First question is, what does shielding mean?
Shielding essentially means shielding the glare from the picture, so you cannot see essentially the direct source of light. And it can also mean shielding it so that light doesn't spill in a direction that you don't want it to go.
So that's part of the actual light installation?
Yes.
Part, okay,
Yeah,
good.
these are LED fixtures, so they're full cutoff, meaning that if you're standing, eye level with the fixture, you can't see the source of lighting. So it doesn't, they're what's also called dark sky compliant, meaning that they don't shine light up in the air and cause more light pollution. And each one of those little LED diodes that's in the light, you can control them individually to make sure that the light is directed in the way that you want it to go. A lot more efficient and better than those old metal halide type of fixtures. So these are high-tech LED, very controllable, and a much more efficient design than older styles.
Okay. What, in your soon-to-be plan for the lighting, what is the set standard? Is it that 0.1 foot candle? Or is that only for the exterior?
Is the maximum the city allows at the property line.
Okay.
There's different standards for the different types of uses. So like a normal residential use, you might see a 0.5, but for a commercial use like this, you normally want something, usually the low side at 0.1 foot candles all the way up to as high as 5. We, at the hottest point, I believe in our last design, was about 5.
I think it was 0.7. That's your last design.
Was that the highest level,
Okay.
I'm saying, exceeded that. I think it was in the 5 range.
But
But
that was
0.7,
interior, not what was
correct.
spilling off.
0.7 was the variance that we were looking for of the spillage.
Uh-huh.
That won't be proposed anymore.
Is there zoning for interior? Is there like a regulation for interior lighting?
I'm not sure if the city has set standards.
Yes, there are lighting standards that we need to comply with. I think
Yep,
the
as
color,
far as-
temperature,
The height, correct.
height, things like that.
But typically, the standard for lighting intensities throughout the site goes based on the use, and it's based upon the Lighting Institute
Okay.
standards.
Would I assume it would match what currently is there in the other parking lots?
Yep.
So the extremely bright area, all when it's from sundown to sunrise? If you don't have these answers now, I'd love to.
Right now, or would these be better?
I don't think all of the fixtures are LED right now. These absolutely will be, and
And
our
they'll
intent
comply
here
with
is,
the ordinance.
yes, and our intent is not to make this look like, a stadium. It's gonna be the lowest level of lighting that is allowed for a.
Residential or
for
institution?
commercial use and institutional use, but.
So that's the difference. It's commercial versus residential, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's, okay.
But again, we will, commit to complying with the city ordinance for this use.
For commercial or for residential?
This is a commercial use, so we would. comply.
Okay. And those are vastly different, correct? The
I
ordinances?
wouldn't say vastly.
Would love to know the difference between residential ordinance and commercial ordinance on lighting.
Nick Pappas, 96 Prospect Street. So I have a question on the shielded lights. You said at eye level, you don't see the glare, but Oak Knoll is significantly higher than the surrounding properties, especially on Prospect Street and down to Larned. So if we look up, we're gonna see the glare.
I mean, if you're lower than any light, you'll see the glare.
Right, so the shielding really essentially doesn't help when it's one of the highest points in the neighborhood.
The shielding is for making sure you don't exceed light levels at the property line, and that's what we'll comply with.
So my property looks in from my backyard into Oak Knoll. I can see every single one of the lights clear as day. They're elevated above me. That will not change, except there will be more in the future. Correct? Because the shielding won't help the fact that I'm 20 feet below
Correct,
Oak Knoll
not
parking
changing
lot.
any of the other lights.
Right. Do you know if they've upgraded the light on, is it Mulcahy Hall too, in the front? Because it just seems,
Not aware.
no? Yeah, it seems like it might have been at a normal standard, and it's incredibly glaring now. Brighter than any of the Summit streetlights in the neighborhood. Yes. Yep. So we don't have the lighting plan. The landscape, you said that on the Blackburn side, where the parking lot will face out, there's a mature hedgerow there. We can clearly see cars coming in and out of it. Will there be plans to make that denser, to fill in the gaps, a big
So
piece?
the landscape
was
architect
clean?
is gonna testify after the traffic engineer.
Okay,
And she can answer that question for you.
then no other questions, thanks.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions for this witness. Hillary, you want to bring up your next witness?
Sure,
May I-
Craig
can I
Paragoy,
ask
the
you a real
traffic
quick
engineer.
question?
Yep, sure.
Would Oak Knoll be open to, say, reducing the number of lights that are on after a certain time? Is that something that they would consider? Say, if it's,
I think depending on safety.
Yeah,
you
of
know,
course. Yeah,
obviously
yeah,
You
yeah.
have to have lights on, certain lights at all times for safety reasons.
well, I'm talking exterior lights in the parking lot. I mean, I drove through there yesterday.
I am
And,
sure
you know.
that they can look at the lights that they have on and evaluate which ones can be maybe turned off at certain times. It's not a problem.
Oh, it doesn't like us again. Yeah. It's detecting them still.
When you're ready, Mr. Ball's going to swear you in.
Go back to old school way again.
So do you want to be sworn in? while he's
Yeah, we
reading
can
that?
at least do
Sure.
that. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Sure, my name's Craig Paragoy, P-E-R-E-G-O-Y.
Thank you, and I know you've appeared before us a number of times, including relatively recently, but if you could please just remind the board and the audience of your background and qualifications.
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey. I testify pretty much on a nightly basis as an expert in traffic, including here in Summit recently.
Any questions from the board, or would we like to accept them once again?
We'll accept you once again. Welcome back.
Okay, what were you requested to do in your capacity as traffic engineer in regard to this application?
Yeah, we were initially brought in to look at this project in 2023 in the springtime, and the development program was still a little bit unknown, and the school year was coming to an end. So we went out there and collected traffic counts, made a lot of observations, and did a lot more than probably we would need to do with what's happening here, which is good because we have that information available. To typical of any other school that, we do a lot of work for schools, typical of any school, you have about a half an hour in the morning at the drop-off time and a half an hour at the evening at the pickup when there's a lot of activity, and then for the rest of the day, it's pretty quiet. They do a really good job. Like I said, we've done a lot of schools and made observations. They do a pretty good job with that process here. The difference that I see at this school that you don't often see is the number of vehicles parked on the street. So this application is obviously addressing that. I don't know if you wanna-
Excellent. And I think you already touched on what you've done, site inspections, reviewed the ordinance, traffic counts, things like that.
Yes. Again, we went in the spring of 2023. We were out there Wednesday, April 19th, Thursday, April 27th, and Wednesday, May 3rd, collecting all this data in anticipation of maybe a wholesale change to the way this project goes. I didn't know exactly what we were going to come out with. As you heard from the prior testimony, we're not changing the staff, not changing the number of students. And so really that half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening, it's not going to be any different than it is today. It's going to continue to, as it operates today. But what is going to improve again is the parking, and I think that's really the kind of the unique feature of this particular school. But just since I bothered to actually count and collect the data, I'll give you the information. If I look at, based on the enrollment at the time, when we did the counts in the spring of 2023, if I look at what the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, projects, that's what we usually use. So if they were going to come in and build this school from the ground up, this was all woods, we were building the school, I would use ITE to project how much traffic. They're about 30% less traffic generation at this location than the ITE would suggest. So that tells me that the things that they're doing to limit the traffic are working. Robust before and after school programs, they shuttle some students to the train station, they have the registration and the limitation on the number of student drivers. All those things kind of keep traffic to a minimum, and that bears out in the numbers. Again, those would be a lot more relevant if we were talking about a change in the student population or redoing the access or new parking fields, but this is a much more simplistic improvement in terms of the traffic impacts, but I thought the information was good to have. And then it'll help us as the school moves forward, if they plan on any other improvements or things like that. But obviously the parking here is the focus. You've heard the testimony from the prior witnesses. We're increasing the number of spaces on site by 31. There's 140 striped parking spaces now. There is the ability for 37 additional spaces in that section. I guess I gotta walk over to the exhibit. Now I'm low tech.
So
There's
this
a-
is the Exhibit A2.
Yes, A2. This wide open area here for if they have events, but that's where recess is during the day. So those aren't striped parking spaces used on a daily basis, but there is that overflow capacity, and that was previously approved by this board. But 140 of the spaces are striped. We're going to 171 spaces, so that's a plus 31. Technically, plus 32, the law would say, because we are providing an EV space, which the state law says counts as 2, which is kind of irrelevant. There's 31 additional striped spaces, legally 32 additional spaces. So when you look at the breakdown of who parks where, you heard the prior testimony that there are 65, and I'll just grab this table. There are 61 student drivers and 16 student spaces. So immediately there's a discrepancy. There's 136 staff and only 120 parking spaces for them. So that's why you're getting this overflow on the street. Primarily Larned Road, 40 cars can park along here, 16 to 17 along Ashland. That's where you're seeing that overflow. So there'll be 31 less of those cars parked there in the future. And importantly, I think, enough for the entire employee population. If you do the math, all 136 employees will be able to park on the site. There's 4 visitor spaces now, which isn't enough. They have 8 to 10 visitors a day, so we'll be able to provide the full 10 visitor spaces and get 25 students onto the lot. So you will see a 31 parked vehicle reduction along those frontages, which I think is a big benefit. The traffic impact, again, not going to be changing unless the board and the neighbors like this connection to the new parking area to Prospect Street. We would not want that to be open for the students or that pickup and drop-off time. I think that needs to stay the way it is. But if the board feels from a traffic engineering perspective, having an extra access point as a relief valve is a good thing. But I understand from a neighbor's perspective, maybe it doesn't look like a house across the street as much anymore if you have more traffic going in and out. So we're sort of indifferent to that, and the school is as well, but either scenario works and is a big improvement throughout most of the day. That half an hour in the morning, that half an hour in the evening is not going to change, but throughout the rest of the day, you're going to see a lot less congestion, a lot less traffic on Larned. And I think that does incrementally improve the traffic impact to a certain degree in that you don't have people trying to parallel park, which disrupts traffic. You don't have somebody circling around when they can't find a spot. So incrementally and anecdotally, you'd see a little bit of improvement, but the big delta here is the parking and getting it off the street. Let me see what else I wanted to touch on. I can describe the circulation. I mean, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, but it's essentially divided into the upper school and the lower school. The pickup and drop off for the upper school, which is off of Blackburn, they have a nice long loop that allows that to occur. That's staying the same. The lower school, they use the loop in front of Bonaventura Hall off of Ashland Road for that pickup and drop off, so it segregates the two. It works fairly efficiently. Again, I've seen schools where there are fairly severe impacts off-site. There are some here, but it's not as bad as I've seen on others. Again, just the parking's the difference, and that's what this application is improving. Just checking to make sure I don't have anything else. Oh, the parking space size is the 8.5 by 18. Typically for a low turnover parking environment, industry standards, you want an 8'3" space or bigger, so we're a little bit bigger than that. The wider spaces, yeah, it makes it a little bit more comfortable, but it's more ideal for when you have traffic in and out all day. Here, whether it be student or staff or visitor, they're coming in once and leaving once, so you don't have that high amount of activity. It's obviously serving the campus now. That's the size spaces. It's not unusual. Typically, probably your big parking garage here, I'm sure they're not full 9 by 18 spaces, so it's not something that's necessarily that tight. It's 6 inches. It works for low turnover parking. In my opinion, it's better to have more of those parking spaces to pull more of that traffic off the street than to have the wider spaces. And I do think getting rid of the driveway on Blackburn, given the concerns, made a lot of sense. Just seeing if there's anything else to touch on. I think that really covers it.
Sorry, I'm just going
In
to ask
terms
if you
of-
could just
sure.
hit on the variances and then talk about 72 Prospect Street.
Oh, sure. Well, the one variance was the parking space size and the hairpin striping. Hairpin striping would make a smaller space feel smaller, so I think it makes sense to have the single spaces. The other parking variances, and you'll hear more from the planner, have to do with parking in the front yard, which is kind of unavoidable because we have all front yards. The additional parking spaces that we're putting along Prospect Street, they won't be striped, but they're sufficient for being able to park those vehicles there. So it'll keep that residential character. I think parking in the front yard of a residential home is fairly common, so that makes sense in that location for sure. So it was the size of the spaces, the hairpin striping, and the front yard, I believe.
Right, and
was the
how many
three that I had to
spaces
touch
will
on.
be at 72 Prospect Street?
8 spaces.
And again, those will not be striped to maintain the residential look and feel of that
Correct.
property.
It's 4 in the front, so basically similar to a driveway. You see there's on the aerial here, there's 4 cars in front of a residential home, so that'll stay residential feeling. And then in the rear building, you have 3 spaces that are farther off the road and 1 additional space. There today, just formalizing them so
Right, all
they're part of the
existing.
record. Yes.
And I think that there's some variances, but they're kind of pre-existing, non-conforming spaces, so.
Yeah, and the plan will go into
Right.
those types of things. But from the traffic standpoint, I think the big ones are the hairpin striping and the size of the spaces, and I certainly think it makes sense for this type of operation.
And you mentioned that, and there is 1 EV space that is required and being proposed.
Yes. Which technically gives us an extra space, but not in reality.
I don't have any other questions.
Right.
Do you have any opinion as to whether the access onto Prospect is a better solution, or to leave that closed off?
From a traffic impact perspective, it's better because you want to disperse the traffic more and you have an extra relief valve. Is it so much better that it's worth upsetting the residential character of Prospect? No. So, I mean, really, we have some neighbors here in the audience, maybe, you know, their opinions I'd be interested in, but I don't think it would noticeably make things that much better. But from a traffic planning standpoint, it's better. But when you look at the context of a whole, being in a residential neighborhood, a school, we certainly don't want students going through there, so it adds another layer of policing. When you add those things that aren't necessarily traffic related, I don't know that it makes it worth it to do.
Okay. Are the, and I don't know if this is you or the school that I should be asking this, are the drop-off times and the pickup times the same for the upper campus and the lower campus?
I have that information. They're very similar, yes, but the upper school drop-off is at 8:10, lower school it's 8:15, and then the upper school ends at between 2:50 and 3:05. It depends on the student schedule, and the lower school ends at 3 o'clock. So it's really 2:45 to 3:15 in the evening is when you see that busy time period.
And is there any concern about operational pickup, say, for queuing out on the roads? Will there be anything increased from that because of these improvements?
There won't. There is some, you start to see that queue for a very short time wraps around onto Larned. People are very good at least the days we were out there, not blocking up Ashland. And same on Blackburn, not quite so much because they have a much bigger drop-off loop, but none of that's going to change with this.
I think that's all I had at this moment.
Just one question. With regard to the hairpin striping, I know you indicated that it's going to make the spaces feel even smaller. In my experience, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a traffic engineer, but that the hairpin striping makes people park more in the center of the space.
That's the intent of it, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's a benefit here, even with an 8'6" space, or?
Again, it's another thing, if you're in a higher turnover environment, it might be a benefit, but even with hairpin striping, once one guy parks too far over, then it snowballs down the rest of the aisle, and
Okay. Thank you.
Questions from the board?
Just quick on parking. We had testimony that, and you took counts at the notice that some were before May 1st and some were after. We had testimony that things change on May 1st. Now, I don't know what that happened in 2023. Did you notice that kind of a change, and what was it like?
we did. In terms of the volumes going in and out, no, and in terms of the parking, I didn't notice any difference, no.
There were no changes?
Yeah,
The
and
fact that
I
all the
learned of
seniors were
that
gone
change.
And the juniors were in?
Yep, and I learned of that change after doing the counts, but I certainly, it's fairly consistent. We even noted how many left during we look at an hourly volume, you're looking at peak hours for a school. So I captured how many people leave Larned and leave Ashland during the peak hour. Obviously, they all leave at some point, but, you know, we really looked into it, and it was fairly consistent
So all the
before
senior
and after May.
spaces were taken up by the juniors?
I guess so.
They
Well,
came immediately?
Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions for this witness? No. All right, questions from the audience? Go ahead.
No, you're up.
You're up.
Okay. One quick question.
The blacktop that's used for, the parking spots that is used for recess, why is that recess? Why is the?
Could you just
Oh, sorry.
restate your name and address?
Of course. I'm Isabel Rogers, 92 Prospect Street.
Thank you.
Why do you not use it for parking and instead have recess on the turf? Correct.
We have recess in both places, so we want the children to have the opportunity for field play as well as blacktop play. So they might be playing basketball or foursquare or hopscotch or jump rope on the hardscaping, and then soccer or football or just kind of running around on the turf.
And that couldn't be done on the tennis courts?
It can be a little bit, but the tennis courts are encumbered by stuff in the middle. And plus our littlest ones who are in pre-K and K, it's a bit of a hike for them. So to use their recess time to trek across the field to get to a kind of a mediocre play space would not be ideal for their play.
Gotcha. That's all.
Alan Becker, 92 Prospect. The turf field, what is played on the turf field currently? What's it used for? Give me a Tuesday on the turf field.
Yeah, so it would be our middle school sports program as well as our junior Royals program, which is a 3rd grade through 6th grade athletics activity.
Okay.
So pretty much every day there's after school.
Excellent. And the turf field is regulation, you gotta have these dimensions and these lines in order to participate in said Tuesday afternoon activities on the turf field?
Yes, for the sports it is, but it's not regulation size for varsity and JV sports. So this is just for our middle school sports.
Okay, so any shot of maybe borrowing, creating a little blacktop so they can hopscotch?
No,
and giving back those parking spaces at the lower, in the spirit of, a little back and forth. Right?
Yeah, I wish that was
Take.
possible. If you looked at kind of where that field is positioned, it's pretty tight right in there. There really isn't discretionary space on kind of any side of it to forgive at all.
But nothing's used regulation-wise for it. It's not
For
regulation
middle
to
school
start
sports
with.
it is. It is not for varsity high school.
Okay. But nothing could be given there to create a blacktop corner or something in order to be able to alleviate and have said parking so we don't have to pave up the backyard.
No, there's literally no space
No
for
shot.
that. Mm-mm.
Okay.
I wish there was.
Good evening, my name is Kevin Morano, I'm at 80 Prospect Street. I was a little confused on the comment about the parking in front of 72 going forward.
Here? Yeah, you can see it's just showing that 2 vehicles could park here and 2 could park here. That nothing's changing with that driveway. That won't be painted in. It's just getting it on the
street or something to that effect.
No, it'll still look the way it does today.
And obviously, lighting is a concern, and we're directly across the street. If I saw again, everybody's talking about, not my backyard stuff, so please excuse me, but, if the lighting plans are not done yet, and it appears to me a number of the cars are gonna be pointing directly into my kitchen from where they're parked, when their headlights are on. I mean.
So there is a landscape plan that just hasn't been presented yet.
Okay.
That she's the next witness.
Oh.
Yeah.
Step ahead of me.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm Eric Nicely, 56 Blackburn Road. If you had a clean sheet of paper within these confines that you're working on, and you were putting another 26 cars and only having one exit out, in those half hours that you talk about that there's not a way to relieve it, is that going to make it worse during those half hours?
No, because the additional spaces are primarily staff spaces, especially which would connect to Prospect. So, they're gonna be arriving not all concentrated at once, like the pickup and drop off. And generally, the staff, they know when that time is, so they're gonna come after or before, depending on their schedule.
Okay.
So I don't think it would affect the busiest times. It would just provide an extra location so they wouldn't have to circulate onto Blackburn. But again, it's a balance. Is there a slight benefit from a traffic perspective? Yes, but are all the other factors worth it? Probably not.
Okay, I was just trying to see if you had a change and you thought about it, would you rather have an exit point through Prospect than you would Blackburn? That was just
With my blinders on purely as a traffic engineer, yes, I'd rather have the extra driveway on Prospect. But given all the other
I
factors.
understand, there's other rules that you're
Yes.
stuck. I'm just asking if you thought it was better or not.
Thank you.
Rebecca Morano, 80 Prospect Street. What year was the field built?
Before I arrived in 2014, so probably 07.
Was a variance necessary for that field to be built?
No.
Was there any concern with parking spaces at that time at the school? Because you have the same amount of people coming and going. Was there any concern for parking at that time when that field was built?
I can answer that. Hillary, I don't know if that's
I mean, I think there's always been a concern about parking, but
So
the
parking wasn't
solution-
addressed when those fields was
solutions
put
that
up?
have been proposed, all of the neighbors oppose every time they have solutions.
What neighbors?
The Larned Road neighbors, the Prospect Street neighbors. Nobody wants it in their backyard, right? So if they keep proposing solutions, there's some group of neighbors that seem to always have an issue with whatever is being proposed.
But it was built,
The field did not require any variances, and I was not involved, so I can't really tell you.
There was a grass field there before the turf field. So when that turf field was put there, it was replacing what was a grass field.
okay, thank you.
Hi, Gary Wu, 45 Blackburn Road. So I know everybody's saying that enrollment's not going to increase. With your expertise, if they increase enrollment by 20%, how would that affect traffic?
The testimony is the enrollment will not increase.
I know, but
That is
hypothetically,
not-
with this expert witness, what would happen to traffic? Can I ask that? Am I allowed to ask that question? It's hypothetical.
We're dealing with the application as it's proposed, not with, any number of hypotheticals.
So then, are they guaranteeing that they're not going to increase enrollment?
The enrollment, I think, has been pretty consistent, and Jen, you can.
Yeah, we've had, the swing of enrollment.
If you could just use a microphone, please.
Yes, of course.
So the swing of enrollment that we've had over the last several years, we wouldn't exceed that. And that swing, if we were to increase by 20 or 30 students for next year, let's say, they wouldn't be driving students. It would be in our younger grades, because our high school grades are close to or at capacity, and we wouldn't exceed that. So any driving population would not increase with an increase in enrollment.
But eventually, they will be high schoolers, so they will be driving.
They will, but we won't increase the number of students that we would have in our graduating class. So we might not accept as many in a particular grade level because we're already at that capacity. We would not exceed that graduation size.
But you're increasing amount of classrooms, so you have more capacity if you want to use it.
We are increasing the number of classrooms to meet the needs that we have today, because we are beyond the industry standard of classroom usage, and we are looking to get more flexibility with the way that we use our classrooms, not to have more
I
students.
understand
in
that,
them.
but you can go back to that level in the future.
I'm sorry, I didn't
What's to
understand.
prevent you from going, so say you're 20% over, say you get, the rooms allow 100 students, you have 120. Now you're adding 50 more spaces, so you're 150. If you go to 20%, you have 180 students now. So what's preventing you from doing that?
Wanting to not have the problem that we have now. So we're trying to solve a problem, not to then recreate it in the future.
So can you guarantee that you're not going to increase enrollment?
I can tell you that we have no intention of increasing our graduating class or our high school enrollment or our driving population. We have some spaces in our lower grades that we would increase our enrollment, but that's how it had been previously. So we would not be looking to exceed something that would create a parking or traffic
So
issue.
eventually, if those lower classmen want to go to high school, you're going to say you can't go here.
No, so our lower school classes are smaller than our high school classes. So for example, our graduating class, let's say, is 65. Our 8th grade class might be 35 or 40. So we increase enrollment at our 9th grade and always have. So it wouldn't impact what we would be graduating. We might only have, let's say, 30 in our 6th grade, for example. But that 6th grade will move up to the high school, and we would only then increase that grade by, let's say, 35 to get to 65. We are not interested in having classes of 80 or 90.
Thank you. Any other questions for this witness?
I know I'm always late to the game, and I apologize. But when I drove through the site the other day, I guess 3 weeks ago, there's a couple of large school buses. Are those yours, or they're for sporting events, or?
Could have been either. If it said Oakville School, that's us.
I didn't really look that close.
It is not. But we have our bus parks.
Yeah, they park on that little, yeah.
Yeah, back
well,
there.
Up
Back
there,
here. Yeah, back here, yes. So it was likely a visiting bus.
And you have a few GMC,
Yes, the Yukons.
yeah.
Yes.
Those are also student?
Our facilities teams use that for a variety of things. They are usually parked right here.
Yeah.
And we do sometimes use those for student transport, maybe one of our smaller teams or an off-site community service project or something like that.
All right. So why don't we take a 5-minute break before Hillary's next witness?
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, we are back in session. Ms. Olds, can you present your next witness, please?
Sure, Marla Roller.
And if you could,
Mr. Ball is going to swear you in.
if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
It's Marla Roller, R-O-L-L-E-R.
Thank you, and can you describe your background and experience for the board?
Yes, I'm a licensed landscape architect. I manage the LA group at Dynamic Engineering. I have a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from Penn State University. I have licenses in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, Maryland, and Texas. They're all in good standing, and I was initially licensed in 1988. Continue to now.
Any questions from the board, or would you like to accept your credentials?
We will accept your credentials. Welcome. Thank you.
Good evening.
Perfect. And just explain the steps you took to prepare yourself for this testimony.
Yes, so I met with Oak Knoll School and did the site inspection. I reviewed the application and as well as the land use ordinance, reviewed the site plan, existing conditions as well. Talked with the school about their desired objectives and worked with the dynamic team so that we would have a cohesive design plan when we put all of this together. We also went to a TRC meeting previously, and we took their comments under advisement and incorporated those into the plan as
Thank you.
well.
Excellent. And did you prepare plans in connection with this application?
Yes.
And can you just describe the landscape plan for the board and members of the interested public? If we can get the computer to work again.
Okay, go to the board. So I am referring to what was Exhibit A2, I believe?
Yes.
Which is the rendered site plan. This shows the overall campus. It's rendered, so some of the existing vegetation is cut just so that you can see clearly the parking lot and circulation through the site. But I think you can see that it's very densely vegetated all the way through. It's extensively landscaped school property with existing mature shade trees, ornamental trees, evergreens, as well as a mix of shrubs and perennials that provides year-round buffering around the campus to the external properties and internal, thank you, internal seasonal beauty to the campus inside, and it's very well maintained. There is existing mature perimeter shade trees around Connolly, as well as a mix of evergreen trees. They will remain. Nothing that we're doing for Connolly, the two additions here, affect anything back here, so we're not changing any of the conditions that are back there. Those trees will remain. We're not adding to it because we don't want to disturb the root systems of those mature trees. So that will remain as is. Then down by Lower Connolly, where we're doing the building here, any existing plants that we can salvage from the existing perimeter, we will replant around the new foundation of Connolly, space permitting. Then on Tisdale, I don't want to get anybody's way. In the Tisdale building here, the two additions that are going on, we're not disturbing any of the buffer that is all the way around this side. There's no grading, there's no tree removal back there. This area, as Dan mentioned earlier, we're obviously removing some trees here for the addition, and then this is where the basin is going, and I'll get into some details about that. Down here on Larned, there is some existing vegetation along the property perimeter as well as a fence, and we are proposing some improvements around there too. Just go to Tisdale. Do we have the? Do we have this exhibit already entered?
No, so that is going to be.
So this is a sightline exhibit.
A5.
So the sightline exhibit is going to show sections of all the various places that we're proposing landscaping around the perimeter of the site, as well as showing some of the landscape material that we're using. This lower section shows Larned, and it's hard to see from a distance, but we're showing the initial planted size of a tree and then as it grows up. So what we have along Larned is evergreen vegetation along the toe of the slope, along with a fence replacement. And we also have large shrubs growing along the top, and we're saving as many mature trees as we can that are in the middle of that to create a nicer buffer that's there already. The Tisdale in the back, this is the basin, which is sunken a little bit down. It's all planted. It's a bioretention basin. The whole thing will be planted with grasses, shrubs, and trees. That helps also with the water intake, and it also keeps it looking natural. Then the buffer will start with 6 to 8 foot evergreens, and then eventually they'll mature up to where it will block the view of the building, and it'll be also fronted on some shrubs to help dress the side that faces the residences. The proposed plans that we filed originally only incorporated, I'm going to switch back to the A2 exhibit, a buffer along the back of 1 Manor Hill. But after talking to the neighbors and hearing some comments from the last hearing, we discussed with the school that we would extend landscaping across the back of the adjacent lot. You can see that there's existing trees back in here, which we're not going to take down to do that. But what we will do is field adjust plantings as we need to fit. It'd probably be more likely large shrubs than a lot of evergreen trees. So you'll get lower level planting, but the existing trees will still give you the higher level planting. But that'll give you additional screening, and we'll work within. We don't want to disturb tree roots and damage the existing trees, but it'll give you some additional planting back in through there. So that will be in addition to that. And in addition to that, they did also discuss the fence that will be going along. We have it on our exhibit here. There was a newer section that had the iron fence shown. An iron fence that we are doing along Larned that we agreed to extend, replace the fence behind that second Manor Hill house as well, as they expressed concern about the condition of their fence that was behind their house.
This
Yes.
fence?
Correct.
On the,
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a newer exhibit. We have it digitally, and I can't get it to pull up. You have it on the, I can show you on the other Tisdale exhibit when I bring that up. The bioretention basin is going to have, I'm going to bring back up the sightline exhibit. Some of the plants that are in there is the red twig dogwood. We have sycamore trees. We have clethra. So there's a variety of things that are in there that are going to flower, that are going to grow tall, that are going to help absorb the water. There's also grasses in there like switchgrass. And these evergreens are a variety of evergreens that will be used to have a mixed planting along the buffer of both Larned Road and the buffer that is behind Tisdale across both of those houses. There's also some holly. So we'll work with the space that we have to mix in these things to make a nice buffer that goes back there that looks natural. The Larned Road fence right now is a chain link fence that's seen better days, and we're going to replace that with an iron fence all the way across. This is a new exhibit, and this is a view from behind 1 Manor Hill, looking at Tisdale, as the landscape would be in its initial planted condition. I will put a caveat to say, though, that there is a lot of existing deciduous trees behind this house that I couldn't show and then appropriately make you see what the buffer planting looks like. So it's a little not 100% accurate that there is more buffering here than what this looks like, but I wanted you to understand what the buffer that we're proposing looks like. So bear that in mind as you're looking at this. So we have a mixed row of evergreen trees that'll be going in at 6 to 8 feet. And then what we'll do along the bottom of this, facing the residential side, to keep it more natural looking, is put in a mix of flowering deciduous shrubs, so that when you're looking at this from this side, you'll have that lower level view. That'll be a mixed flowering buffer, and then you'll have the upper evergreen. And then what we did was projected to 5-year growth. So 5 years, it'll be to this, based on the selection of plants that we chose. And I would say that the 10-year growth then will be, you won't even see the building at that point. Likewise, on this side, we have Blackburn Road.
So this would be AA,
This is
because that
AA.
was A6 and 7.
Okay. Rendering of the existing condition. There is a double row of evergreens.
It's a very generous, liberal interpretation.
Please don't interrupt her testimony. Thank you.
There's a double row of evergreens based on the best effort that we could make to represent what we felt was out there. That exist all the way across there now. If you look at the aerial view on the maps, it's a staggered row of evergreens. They have to be planted at a certain spacing so that they can adequately grow to mature. If you plant anything other than a emerald green arborvitae at 3 feet together immediately, because they don't grow all that much, you can't plant things, you have to give them space to fill in and grow. So that's why there's a double staggered row, so that one is behind the other space, so that you essentially get a pretty solid planting. And again, you still have to have some space for them to grow. We are going to add to the front of that. In the 5-year growth, they would be significantly higher, but understanding that sometimes with evergreens, depending on how the ground plane, the branches do vary with the ground plane, we would fill in the bottom with this as well, facing on the street side, so that you would get the benefit of lower level planting. And again, as Dan mentioned earlier, the parking lot is lower, so just by virtue of the change in elevation and grade, the 3 feet lower that it is already does hide some of the parking lot lights that would be facing in that direction. So again, we can certainly work with residents and with the planner in the town to make sure that the selection of things that we're picking here benefits everybody. We can do, more evergreen, less evergreen. We can also, depending on the space that we have, plant some additional behind for a third row where space permits, to try to bolster up that while they're all filling in and growing. And in addition to that, we would also have a couple of shade trees in the parking lot to just soften and shade that as well. And the fence, I'm going to switch back to the Tisdale, because I don't think I pointed it out in the rendering, and I'm not sure it's easy for you to see, but there is a black iron fence shown in here behind. And that is the same fence that will be going all the way down Larned as well. We are removing, I think somebody asked a question earlier, down in, mostly in the area of Tisdale, for the improvements that are there. We are removing, what's the number? "27 evergreen trees that are existing and 21 deciduous trees in order to accomplish the improvements in that area. However, we are planting back 13 deciduous trees, and we are putting back 51 large-scale evergreen trees and 44 smaller-scale evergreen trees. So we're significantly planting more than we were taking out. In addition to that, there are 71 additional evergreen shrubs, 132 deciduous shrubs, and 68 perennials and grasses throughout the site. So we believe with
given the improvements that Oak Knoll is proposing, that there is sufficient mature landscaping in the areas around the site. Some of it is on Oak Knoll's property, some is on the residential property adjacent that provides significant buffering to the property already. Again, existing trees along the western property line will all remain. And due to existing tree canopies and expensive root systems, we're not going to underplant or disturb what areas that we're not disturbing, but we've put in significant landscaping to help buffer some of the new things and also to improve the view from Lorna, where we're really not doing any improvements at all, but we're just trying to make that a little bit nicer as we've listened to the comments from neighbors.
Okay, and did you have an opportunity to review the administrative comments?
Yes,
I think you've already answered the planner's comment.
we did, and I think the only other comment we had was from the forester, and it was regarding a few species, and we said we would work with them to swap out species.
I think the forester actually approved and recommended the approval of this plan. The Environmental Commission was
Was this-
talking about some native
So-
plants.
Right, and that we would swap out some. The plant list is significantly native. Some things we chose were not invasive, but not necessarily native just to help with deer browse. Sometimes some things are a benefit, but we'll switch out what we can, work with them.
Great.
I have no more questions.
Marie?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Ed, do you have questions for this
Yeah,
one?
just a few
Great.
questions. The buffer to the rear of Tisdale, that's proposed along the adjacent property, that's in a 10-foot area. You're staggering the trees where you can. What's the spacing on the trees themselves at time of planting?
It depends on the variety. Where we have green giant arborvitae trees, because they get to the mature size of something more significant, those are 10 feet on center. Where we have emerald sentinel juniper, for example, those are closer to 6 feet on center. So it just depends on the variety.
Okay. In the basin itself, that's behind the railing, that's shown in the illustration, did you take any artistic license with those trees that are proposed in that basin? Are they shown in this illustration?
We didn't take any art. There's a existing, I believe, over here. We didn't show them as anything. These are the existing trees that are there now.
You
They're
didn't
not-
show what's in the basin.
They don't show above what the evergreen screen is. They're there, but they're behind because the basin is a few feet lower. So even though those trees are planted, the evergreens are 6 to 8 feet. Those trees are going in at like 14 feet, but because the basin is several feet in the ground, it kind of evens out. So you'll eventually see them much taller because they'll mature. Sycamores will mature to be 60, 70 feet tall at some day.
Right. Because of the nature of this being, I guess, one of the areas where there's relief required for the buffer, is it possible to raise the size of the caliber of the trees proposed in the basin? Just so that they have more net effect back behind this buffer, adjacent to the buildings? I just wanted to put that out there.
I think that we could,
Obviously, leave that to the board,
we
but
could consider that for sure.
It's a way of adding to that buffer and having
Sure.
the basin
Mhm.
be more effective.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So in your illustration, your second set of illustrations that are shown, I guess, along Prospect, is it Prospect or that's along?
Blackburn.
Thank you. That's simulating the existing trees that are out there, is that right?
It was simulating existing trees.
Okay. And so therefore, you're adding to that as far as plants in the foreground and plants in the background to try to fill in the gaps behind those plantings.
Correct.
You're willing to do additional plantings if it's necessary.
Correct.
Might be something for the board to consider with the forester, as far as asking them to maybe conduct a field visit to see where there should be some interplanting relative to that. Is there any plans proposed, I know the illustration was just shown tonight, to the reconfigured parking area along Blackburn. Is there any plantings adjacent to the parking spaces themselves in that area?
There's some existing hedging in front of some of the parking, and we'll certainly work with you to enhance that as we may see fit to
I know that was a
help buffer.
concern of some of the neighbors as far as headlights possibly projecting out adjacent across the street. If you put planting closer to the parked cars,
Mhm.
would you agree that it tends to block the view
If,
better?
We would, well, if the parked cars are 3 feet lower, then I would rather rather the planting be closer to the street that's at a higher elevation would be more effective. So it would be at whatever the higher elevation would be in the particular location to be the most effective.
But you're willing to look at that to block the headlights,
Absolutely.
to the cars. Okay, nothing further. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Board, questions for this witness?
I'll take one. I'm looking at Mr. Linson's comments. They're dated December 19th, 24. Has he seen any of these, which I consider significant changes to your plan? Has he had a chance to review them?
You mean the rendering?
There's a whole plan that's been changed.
Do you mean the new parking plan?
We have all kinds of new things on here. Has
So the
Mr.
only-
Linson seen any of the revisions?
Mr. Linson has not seen the new parking layout from tonight, but it's in the same location basically as it was previously.
Has he seen any of these drawings?
These are just renderings, usually he
I mean, we're
doesn't-
seeing them for the first time.
Right, usually the renderings are just presented at the hearing. He's seen the landscape plan, which has all of these on them, but this is just what it would look like in real life if you looked at it. I think that's pretty typical of what,
I would really like Mr. Linson to have a second bite at the apple.
Well, I would just add that he approved the plan as it was, and what we're showing is additional planting, so I can't imagine.
I think
We
that
can
as a
certainly share it
condition of
with him.
approval, we can certainly work with him. Again, I think that there was also some other areas that we were gonna have as a condition to add some additional plantings to buffer and screen some of those certain areas, so we can certainly make that a condition of approval,
Mm-hmm.
that he gets another review.
I think that would go a long way towards helping the neighbors
Sure.
have confidence in
Absolutely.
So I
where
think,
we are.
He did approve the plan as was shown.
But I'm
And
not sure
Yes.
that that's what I'm looking at right now.
so a revised plan will be
Yes.
reviewed by the city forester and to take into, Ed's comments into account as well. That
Absolutely.
you'll consult with the city forester
Yes.
regarding the plantings once they go in.
Yes.
Perfect.
Other questions?
Sure. I'm glad to hear that you're doing some work on Larned, because I drove through there and it's,
It's gonna be
I would be pretty
significantly
upset.
improved.
It's going to be much prettier.
although I tried to get a soccer ball, but I couldn't reach it. But anyway, on Blackburn, where we're talking about these additional plantings to help shade the traffic, the headlights, was there any consideration of a fence? 4-foot-high fence? Then you don't have to work, like, we've had applications here where they talk about how the bottom of the pine trees get some disease, and then they ended up, it goes up, and then you end up replacing a tree as opposed to maybe a 4-foot white vinyl fence, never dies, does get dirty, but you can clean it. Even though you do have a 3-foot difference in elevation, there might be, I'm just throwing it out there.
I'm not sure if a white vinyl fence would be consistent
is.
with the
Well, I
character
could go the other way and
of
say, why don't
the-
we continue the
of
stone wall? So, I know it's a little bit more expensive, but it fits in with the motif of the school, just
I
as
think
a
that-
solution.
I think that's why there was the if you just turn
Right.
it back, those under plantings to kind of take that into
Mm-hmm.
consideration to make sure
Right.
that underneath the trees were also going
Yeah,
to be.
it's, we can make it look any way we want. I hate to say that, but,
Well, I mean,
you
again,
know.
I'm sure that the board could retain jurisdiction over
Yeah.
landscaping, and we'll work with the forester to,
I mean, that was the idea
Yeah,
of
yep.
adding lower level planting. And again, the parking was already lower, so
Yeah.
that's really not, the headlights weren't at that level. And then we were going to supplement that anyway, just to make sure that we had that extra level of protection in addition to things behind there. So I'm confident that, and again, you do have to give some ability for plants to grow.
Of course, yes.
But that it would be very sufficient and really more aesthetically pleasing than a solid fence, in my opinion.
Okay. Thought I'd ask.
Any other questions? No? All right. Questions from the public? Again, please, questions only. Your name and address.
So that is a very generous liberal interpretation of what exists. Picture would look very different.
Just questions only at this point.
Are you aware of
I believe that's a proposed
Yeah,
rendering.
that's the
No,
proposed.
the ones that are there, the ones that are there
Yeah,
have been there for
those.
a couple of years. I don't know the exact date of installation. Okay, that's what I was gonna say,
There
maybe
was
a couple
set
of years.
before that died,
Correct.
and these were replaced. Do you know why the other ones died?
It was not a part of this project then.
Okay. Are these irrigated? Is there a drip line or anything in these, or would there be drip lines with the trees that you're proposing?
If you plant the right plant, you don't need to irrigate trees and shrubs. You need to irrigate lawns, you need to irrigate perennials. You manually water for the first year until establishment, and if you plant the right plant, it doesn't need irrigation to grow after that. It'll get acclimated to regular rainwater. Having said that, if something gets diseased and there's a new disease and plants every day, there's nothing you can do to control that. So if what was there got a disease and that's why they died, those existing evergreens that were there previously didn't die from lack of irrigation. They died from probably getting some kind of contracted disease. Just like Dutch elm disease, now we have emerald ash borer, like things migrate, they die, and then you have to replant. So that's just a part of the evolution of plant material.
What is the spacing between those trees?
They're probably 10 feet on center because that's what they would
Even
need
with the
space to
offset?
grow. They would be 10 feet on center in one line, and then you stagger so that the 10 feet on center behind it makes it 5 feet apart visually, with the hope that you
Is
do
that-
a
is that-
stagger
is
growth for, yeah,
that-
that's an industry standard.
Is that what it currently is?
I believe that is what it is. I would have to double check. I'm not gonna guarantee that off the top of my head.
Did you consider putting a wall? I mean, the wall is beautiful, it's a little bit disrepair from time to time, but like, did you consider putting a wall in
No.
along it, because it's.
We thought the
fit
landscape was more appropriate.
Well, I hope we did. Save that for the comments. On the Tisdale catch basin, I don't think I appreciated this, but there's plantings that go in the catch basin.
Are you referring to the retention basin,
Yeah.
not a catch basin?
Oh, I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's a bioretention basin,
Yeah.
and the nature of that is that you
Basin.
plant it
Yeah.
entirely. So the entire thing is planted.
The 60 by 30,
The entire thing is planted,
how many
correct?
plants will go into that 60 by 30?
A lot.
Are some of them,
It's a mixture of plants, so there's, from the large scale,
You
there's
just give me the large.
3 sycamore trees.
okay,
And then there are dozens of shrubs and tons of grasses.
and how below grade are the sycamore trees?
The whole basin ranges from 3 to 6-ish feet
7,
deep.
Yeah.
So and the sycamore trees are going in approximately 14 feet, so they'll be 7 feet out of the ground from the get-go, and then if we do some larger trees, as was discussed, it'll start from there. And then all of those plants, the whole point of a bioretention basin is that they, not only is water infiltrating down into the system, but they are absorbing water up into the tree, and so it's a dual benefit of stormwater.
And then are there any, this may not be for you, but the second question relates to you, is are there any windows or lights on the back of the Tisdale addition?
This is the back of Tisdale.
So all those are windows there that are new?
I would defer to the architect for whether they're spandrel glass or real glass. I'm not.
I don't know if my question was answered. Those are new windows on the addition? New addition, new windows. Okay, so lighting will come out.
Do windows exist there now?
No, I'm sorry, windows do exist in that one, backwards. We're replicating.
Gotta come up.
We're covering up.
Okay,
Yeah.
Ralph, why don't you come up and answer the question?
Ralph Rosenberg, NK Architects. As a point of reference, we are replicating the wall we are covering. So this new wall replicates the existing wall. So the existing gymnasium has windows on 2 sides.
The new gymnasium, the auxiliary gymnasium, would only have windows on one side. So they are existing windows, we are basically moving those south. But they are clear windows facing the side yard.
And this is the view from Manor Hill, correct?
Correct, correct.
You had mentioned that you're gonna extend the set of green giants up to the next, how far up?
We're going to extend a buffer planting across to the next house. When you look back at, if I could bring up the original A2. The house that's here, we're not taking down any of the perimeter trees that are there now. They're going to stay, we're not disturbing them. So we're probably not going to be extending green giants and emerald sentinel junipers because they're not going to fit, and we don't want to compromise the root system of these existing big, beautiful trees. What we probably will do is look for things like winterberry holly that will take the shade, nine bark, other types of things that will take the shade but grow to be 10 or 12 feet tall. So you'll get a significant human level screen at that lower level, and they'll thrive underneath the mature shade that's there and we'll field adjust them. I can show you a row of things on here, and when we go out there, maybe there's a big root and we'll have to move it to work around that. So it'll be an extension of a buffer. It won't be green giant arborvitaes. If we could fit one in between someplace, it's hard to tell at this scale on this exactly where there's a space, but it'll be a mixed planting.
Because there's a lot of taller oak trees there.
Correct.
But they only provide this much screening on the way up.
Right.
And then up top, they provide screening, but not where light comes out of the windows. So right now, there's a room in the back of Tisdale that the lights are constantly left on at night. And, I was just asking if there's a way you can consider bringing some of the screening around the back of Tisdale and fit it under the.
We can certainly take a look at that, but our goal was to absolutely minimize disturbance around that building, so we took down the absolute minimum amount of trees and left everything that we could leave there. And so you don't want to compromise the health of those oaks by jamming something in that's not going to grow because of the shade of the oaks, and
I agree with that.
so we would certainly look at that in the field condition and see if there is a possibility of us to fit something larger scale on the side there.
There's a significant amount of light that comes out of there for the gym when it's used at night, and whatever screening you can provide would be.
Could you articulate better for me so I could understand when I look at it what you mean?
Yeah, there's a room on this side that has a window that comes out. This is an old picture.
Is this, do you live here?
Yeah, I live here.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's a lot of light that comes out of this.
Okay. There might even be room at the edge. We'll have to take a look and see.
I think that's something that the school
Absolutely.
would
Yep.
would agree to.
Let me just see if I have any. I asked you about the stone wall, right? Would you consider that? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. I'm Eric Nicely, 56 Blackburn Road. Will the garden that's behind by the cafeteria still be there?
That garden isn't there right now.
Will any of the plants, do they like to have what I call darkness during some part of their day?
Do you
Some
mean
plants are
shade?
impacted by.
Correct.
Some plants are impacted by how many
Hours of sun they get.
exposure they have.
Correct.
And what I'm trying to ask is if the lights are on, would that potentially impact
No.
the plantings that you're looking?
No, no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the public for this witness?
Okay, last witness is John Barry.
step up and we'll swear you in.
All right. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Sure. John Barry, B-A-R-R-E-E.
Thank you. Can you describe your background and experience for the board?
Sure. I have a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers University. I'm a licensed professional planner in New Jersey. I'm a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Both of those in good standing since 2014. And I regularly represent and testify before boards such as this, and I've been before this board a couple times.
Any questions from the board, or would you like to accept them once again?
We will accept your credentials. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. So in preparation for this evening, I certainly visited the property, reviewed the materials with the team, reviewed the various professional reports and the city's development review ordinance, and put together kind of a brief synopsis of all the different planning relief that we're seeking. We've heard about all aspects of this so far from the other witnesses, so I'm really bringing everything together, summing up the other testimony that you've heard this evening, and last time as well. So in essence, what we have is an application to make improvements to the Oak Knoll property and school operations. The various aspects of the development you've heard about, the additions to the buildings for the purpose of creating more flexible space to accommodate the existing population of the school and to bring the learning environment into a more modern standard, a more accessible standard, and something that the school and its students can continue to thrive with. The various other site improvements that you've heard about go into accommodating those improvements to the school program and hopefully trying to work with the city and the neighbors to mitigate any impacts that come along. And you've heard from the different witnesses and you've seen in the evolution of the plans that the applicant is certainly willing to work with their neighbors, and we've appreciated all of the input that we've gotten both during community meetings and as part of this process. You've gotten a good overview of the property itself. It's got multiple frontages, 4 frontages really going around. It's a large site. It's got the school campus, 2 former residential structures on Prospect Street. I'm not going to go through all of that again because I think everybody's heard it, but just to set our stage. Property's in the R15 residential zone, which permits single-family residences, public parks and playgrounds, and conditionally permits institutional uses like this, educational institutions, houses of worship, things of that nature. The main relief that we're seeking and why we're at the zoning board is a conditional use variance. There are a number of conditions spelled out in the development ordinance that the educational institutions in the R15 zone have to comply with. We're also seeking a D4 variance under the statute, which is for exceeding the permitted floor area ratio. And wrapped into the D3 conditional use variance is also a D6 height variance. We'll talk about height in detail in a moment, but those are really overlapping in their analysis. So as far as the conditional use standards go, there's a minimum front yard requirement of 50 feet. The 72 Prospect Street building has a 30-foot setback to Larned Road, which is down in the bottom right corner of sheet A2 over there. That's an existing condition. It's a technical deviation since no change is being proposed there, but we wanted to make sure we note that because that house is proposed to be incorporated into the overall site. There's a minimum side yard setback requirement of 50 feet. In the corner of the Connolly Hall addition, there's a 34.2-foot setback. That's actually not quite as far as the existing setback. There's a point in the existing building that's 28 feet. So the new setback is not even going as close to the side yard as what exists, but it is not meeting what's required. That area is about a one-story portion of the building that's about 320 square feet in area within that required side yard. I'll skip building height for just a moment because we'll get into that in more detail. We just heard a lot about the side buffer, which is toward the left side of our A2 drawing. That's in the area on the side of the Tisdale building where we have the bio-retention basin that we just heard testimony about. There's a side yard buffer requirement of 50 feet. 10 feet is proposed to the retention basin and 6.2 feet to a walkway area adjacent to that. The lot coverage we heard about in the engineering testimony. There's a maximum lot coverage under the conditional use standards of 40%. 42% exists today before any of the proposed improvements. And with the modifications to the parking lot that we heard about this evening, 46.6% is proposed. The maximum building coverage that's permitted is 15%, and 16% is being proposed with the new additions to the buildings. Finally, we have two issues related to parking. Parking's only permitted inside and rear yards. Considering that most of the property is front yard, based on its orientation, we had a little bit of a hardship with that issue. The parking in the front yard at 72 Prospect at both Larned and Prospect is existing in the front yard. And then some of the new parking that's proposed behind Mulcahy Hall at 76 Prospect will be in the Blackburn Road front yard. Finally, we have a existing minimum parking setback issue. 20 feet is required for the parking setback. The proposed new parking behind 76 complies with that, but some of the existing parking at 72 Prospect that's being incorporated into the site does not meet that requirement. There's a 13.6-foot setback to Larned and a 0-foot setback to Prospect. The driveway comes right into a parking space. Now for the height, where are we at A9? A10?
We are at A9.
A9, okay. So this is an exhibit that was prepared by NK Architects. It's a blow-up and a modification of a little diagram that was on sheet A8 of the submitted plans. And what it's really showing is a full cross-section of the Connolly Hall buildings, the lower and upper Connolly. It's a little hard to wrap our heads around. We spent 20 minutes this morning on a call with the whole team trying to figure out exactly how this all fit together, so we wanted to make sure it was as clear as possible. The city has two different standards that it uses to measure height. It has a measurement from average grade plane, and it has a measurement from the lowest point of the building to the highest point of the building. And based on how Connolly is configured today and how the additions are proposed, those are two very different things. So if you come into the site from Blackburn and you're at Upper Connolly, you're looking at what's really a two-story building. And the proposed addition is matching the 2 stories with a new ridge feature that you heard about during the architectural testimony. As you come down more into the property and work down to Lower Connolly, you're coming around the side of the building. You're sort of presenting now into a new 3-story portion that's below what we were looking at before. So we have what's functioning as a 3-story addition for Lower Connolly, and that's one of our variances. 2 stories is permitted, and this based on how the floors are defined, counts as 3 stories. And then as far as the heights themselves go, we have the high-low, so the top of the building to the highest point to the lowest point of the building. On the Lower Connolly is 45.58 feet.
So sorry, John, I'm just going to interrupt you. It's actually Upper Connolly that has the 3 stories, and Lower Connolly is 2 stories, which seems counterintuitive, but the way that the ordinance is written, Upper Connolly considers that 3rd floor from that building as one of the stories on Upper Connolly.
Yeah, all that work, still got it wrong. So this part here coming into the Upper Connolly building actually counts, even though when we're looking at Upper Connolly, we only see 2 floors. This 3rd floor here is considered part of its overall structure.
Even though you would never see it.
Even though you would never see it all in one place. And then likewise, kind of the opposite with Lower Connolly, even though we have a functional basement level, it's enough below the grade that it doesn't count as a story. So that's only considered 2 stories. So we need a variance for the 3 stories at Upper Connolly. So as far as the high-low, the lowest point to the highest point, we have the 45.58 feet at Lower Connolly. And then, because it is all one building, really, we have 72.1 feet from that very low corner all the way down and around the hill at Lower Connolly to the top point of the ridge that's back up toward Blackburn at the top of the Upper Connolly addition. From average grade plane, again, this average around the entire building, Lower Connolly complies. It's at 26.58 feet. Upper Connolly, this dimension here is 52.9 feet. So technical, in my mind, in nature rather than practical, because at any point where you're standing near these buildings, they don't present themselves as anywhere near this tall because you can't see all of this from any one vantage point on the site. And then in addition, we have a variance for the average grade height for Tisdale, which is 37.3 feet, and the high-low for Tisdale, which is 40.3 feet. So those were fairly straightforward, and less than 10% deviations in both cases. All right. Okay, so that's all the relief associated with the D3 and the height issues. As far as the planning proofs go, looking at whether or not the site can continue to function despite this non-compliance with these conditions. And we have an inherently beneficial use, which does the heavy lifting for the positive side of the ledger on the analysis from a planning perspective. The school is recognized under the statute as an inherently beneficial use. The school has been located here at this property for just over 100 years now, and so has been functioning and evolving with the neighborhood throughout that time. Many of the conditional use standards and issues are related to how the site has been developed over the years and the topography of the property. We've got the dramatic slopes throughout the property. The improvements are generally interior to the site. You've heard about the screening. The height issues are really all interior to the site and matching the existing buildings. The height of the existing buildings is driving the height of the additions. With regard to coverage, you've heard about the stormwater management that's being proposed to enhance and improve the conditions that are there today. We've got new landscaping around the perimeter to assist with any of the setback and buffering issues, and the commitment by the applicant and their professionals to work with the city's professionals to make sure that any of those buffers are designed and maintained to the satisfaction of all. In addition, in terms of integrating 72 Prospect into the campus, it was at one time part of the school from 1952 to 1971, so it's returning back to its historic home as part of the overall campus. As far as the proofs for the floor area ratio, we're dealing with a similar set of circumstances, and the standard of proof is really focusing on whether the site can accommodate the use with the larger floor area. The renovations, you've heard testimony from an operational standpoint about how they're necessary to improve the function of the school, make it more accessible, more modern. I can share from having been in the Connolly building that there's not an elevator, there's very limited bathroom facilities. So just from a brief visit, those functional needs are obvious. Portions of the buildings that account toward the floor area ratio are barely perceptible, and certainly not all perceptible from the same location on the site. So as far as that standard goes, it seems like the property can easily accommodate the relatively minor deviation in floor area ratio. Now, in addition to those D variances that we just went through, there are a few bulk variances being sought. The proposed fence, the iron fence that Marla just testified about along Larned Road that's wrapping around the side of the basin there, It's proposed to be 5 feet tall, where 4 feet is permitted in a front yard. You heard from Craig in some extent about the parking stall dimensions. 9.9 feet, 9 by 18 feet is required, where 8.5 by 18 is proposed. The parking space striping, where hairpin's required and the single striping is proposed. All of those are relatively de minimis in nature, more technical in my opinion. And then we saw during the architectural testimony the signage package that was being proposed internal to the site, and heard from the architect how the signs were placed and designed before they were measured. They were considered in the aesthetics of the buildings, they were considered in the overall view of the campus, and the relief that's being sought is de minimis in my opinion. Maximum of 8 square feet is permitted for building signs. Of the 6 signs there, 17.63, 10.35, 28.3, 10, 11.25, and 9.42 square feet. So nothing massive, all within the facade dimensions and confines of the buildings, fitting in with the rest of the campus. The maximum sign height requires a deviation because the signs are proposed to be mounted higher up above the first floors, and the maximum lettering size is proposed to exceed the 6 inches that's permitted. 10, 12, and 18 inches are permitted at various points. And then finally, we have a variance for steep slope disturbance, 6,227 square feet of slope disturbance, which is a little less than 10% of the regulated slopes on the property are being proposed to be disturbed. These are all the disturbances are necessary based on locations of the existing improvements and how the developments will fit in with the existing buildings and connect to them. The disturbance will be managed. You heard the engineering testimony about management of the disturbance, and there won't be any excessive erosion or other unstable conditions, and that stormwater management will mitigate any long-term impacts. So as to the C variances, there is an element of hardship related to the topography of the site, especially for the steep slopes. And then there are a number of benefits that the project as a whole advances. The school, as it's in its function, promotes the general welfare, which advances purpose A. The additional parking that's being proposed, we're not seeking a parking variance. The proposed parking is meant to help deal with issues that have been raised by the neighbors over the years and help manage the school's operations. And so that promotes Purpose H, which encourages the design and location of transportation routes to promote the free flow of traffic. Purpose I is encouraging a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques. We're maintaining the historic character of the Prospect Street frontage, so there's no change there from Prospect Street. And then the other buildings, the additions are matching the existing architecture to the best extent possible. And then finally, encouraging coordination of public and private procedures for the more efficient use of land. The applicant here has been working very closely with the city for a long time to try to ensure that it remains a good neighbor in this location, and that the improvements that are being proposed here are not only functioning better for the school, but also helping alleviate some of the stresses that have been noted in the surrounding areas. So as to all of that deals with the positive criteria side of things. Briefly, as to the negative criteria, you've heard all the different mitigation approaches that the applicant's proposing related to parking, related to landscaping, lighting, and the stormwater management. The proposal's not going to be exacerbating any of those issues, and we're going to be taking steps all along the way to try to lessen them to the extent possible. And finally, when it comes to the impairment of the zoning ordinance and master plan, there is none that I would see in any of the goals and objectives of the master plan or the recent reexaminations. And under the zoning ordinance, this use is anticipated in this location. It's a conditional use. So we're doing the best we can to address those deviations as noted. So in conclusion, I think the site has functioned as it has, looking to improve and mitigate circumstances where we can. And the use is inherently beneficial and certainly meets the positive criteria for relief. We feel we've worked through enough of these different design exercises to mitigate and address any negative criteria, and the applicant's committed to doing so moving forward as well. So with that, I think I'll conclude. Yes?
I just have a quick note that we're also seeking a modification of prior conditions of approval to permit parking behind 76 Prospect Street. Also, the potential to use the Prospect Street driveway if that's something that the board desires. And also to permit students to park in those first 16 spaces closest to Ashland on Larned. The reason for that is so that they're not parking on other streets and they're all contained on that same Larned, Ashland, and Blackburn area.
Thank you. All right. Experts, questions for this witness?
Just a few. Thank you for your testimony. What I would offer as a question is relating to the building height that's being proposed. What is your testimony with regard to the features of the site itself that are requiring that building height measurement relief? Would you say it's the topography, the change of grade, that actual natural condition?
Yes, it's a combination of the topography, which is the natural condition, but also the placement of the existing structures. So in order to tie in new additions to the floors of the existing buildings, they're required to be placed in such a way and of a certain height to function.
Okay. Hopefully I'm pronouncing the building right. The Connolly building is the building that we're adding an addition onto.
That's this building right here.
Right, and that's the one that has the minimum side yard setback of 32 feet, I believe?
Correct.
34.
The-
Hold on.
Getting close.
34.2.
Yeah, 34.2.
Okay.
And there's an
34.2.
existing 28-foot
And
setback.
that's to an appendage that's being added to the back of the cafeteria, but you said it's a one-story elevation?
That portion is one story, yes.
Okay. What are the mitigating factors for that distance offset to the adjacent properties?
In terms of mitigating that specific distance?
Yeah, from a planning standpoint.
Well, the purpose of it first is that the placement of that little bump out is because it's adjacent to the existing kitchen, so to preserve the function of the building, that's why it's being bumped out there rather than elsewhere.
Understood.
I would have to defer to Marla. I don't know if there's the ability to add any other landscaping in that location to help screen that. I know there are.
Isn't it also down in grade as well?
It is, yeah, it's
Neighboring property?
down lower than the neighboring property.
It's only a one-story elevation.
Correct.
And it's only 320.
It's 320 square feet in
And
that.
I think there's existing.
I just want to make sure
Yes.
that's part of the record as to why that distance from a planning standpoint.
Yes, thank you.
Makes sense. The FAR for the building, I know you indicated that the illustration was very helpful, even though you may have had the wrong number of stories, but regardless, as you look at FAR, and the purposes of FAR really is to control the bulk and mass. Sometimes it's also intensity of use on the property, but yet the bulk and mass of the building, how is that being broken up by the architecture from your standpoint, professional planning standpoint?
So from within the site, depending on where you're standing, there are only certain buildings and only certain pieces of buildings visible from any given location. And then certainly the same applies from around the perimeter of the site. So depending on which property, adjacent property or street frontage you're on, you can only see portions of the campus. So it's not a situation where you have a large monolithic structure. It's not a situation where there's a street wall that's overwhelming in mass. And so the different diverse buildings and pieces of buildings being built into the topography, being scattered around the property, helps soften all of that space, all the volume, all the mass associated with the structures.
And because it's multiple buildings?
Yes, that's certainly part of it.
Okay. Regarding the sign variance, I know you touched on, I think you indicated that was somewhat de minimis. I might disagree, but yet from the standpoint of the signs themselves, isn't one of the other benefits of the sign is sort of more of a wayfinding purpose in the interior circulation of the campus?
Yes, and there are four interior identification only. None of the signs are designed to or will functionally be visible from outside the campus. They're not attracting visitors to the property. They're not advertising the presence of the school. They're merely identifying the buildings once you're already on the campus and circulating around the site.
Okay, and their size is necessary, why?
Both for identification purposes, so that the buildings are easily known, and also, as the architect testified, there's an aesthetic idea behind it. There's some logos, there's a cross, there's elements that are not simply words, and they're all designed to be a package that fits into the facades of the building.
I'm sorry if I didn't hear the earlier testimony by the architect, but are any of the signs going to be illuminated?
No.
They are not, no.
Thank you. Your testimony regarding the parking within the front yard, I think you touched on, and if I correct me if I'm wrong, the fact that the proposed changed parking area along Blackburn, that's also going to be in the front yard?
Yeah, so there's the setback standard that the changed parking meets, but it's still located within a technical front yard.
Technical front yard, as in the front of a building. And the
Right.
reason why that variance really is applicable is because of the multiple frontages of the property?
To a point, yeah. There's very few places you could place parking that wouldn't end up in a front yard. So it's really driven by the fact that the site has 4 frontages.
Okay. And lastly, with the buffer that's proposed along the southerly property line from the actual basin area, 10 feet is being proposed. From your professional opinion, why is that 10 feet appropriate from the standpoint of what's being proposed and I guess the testimony of the landscape architect?
Yeah. So the 10-foot is the first row of screening, really. Then beyond that, we've got the bioretention basin, and in the back and forth with our neighbor, the landscape architect articulated how there would be sycamores, there would be some other plantings, and so the basin, while technically within a required buffer area, at planting will itself serve a lot of that function by being a planted area between neighboring property.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions?
Thanks, Ed. Marie, do you have anything for
I
this
do not
witness?
have any questions for this witness.
Great, thank you. Board questions for this witness?
I don't know if this is your purview, but you mentioned that the parking spaces you said were 8.5 feet wide, as opposed to, I think we said 8'3".
8 feet 6 inches.
8
which
feet
is
6
8.5.
inches. Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought we had mentioned 8'3".
Craig used
before.
8'3" as a example of kind of the bare minimum.
Okay.
So we were 8'6" is what's
Okay.
proposed.
And then the signs, would you need a variance if you incorporated the signs into the facade of the building? If it was like, I don't know how to call it, like if it was engraved into the,
I think it's still
Still-
considered a
still
sign.
considered.
They would still be considered, yeah.
okay. And I think that's all I really have.
Mr. Steiner?
No, I'm all right.
No? All right. So we will now take questions only from the public for this witness. All right. Okay. So you're done with all your witnesses?
I'm done with all the witnesses. I do have a summation, but I can do it after the
Public
the
comment?
public
All
comment.
right. So now this is the time for the public to come up and tell us your thoughts, positive or negative, about this project. So if anyone would like to do that, please, again, state your name, spell your last name,
We'll
and give us
actually,
your address.
we'll be swearing you in.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So if you could please raise your right hand, do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
Rebecca Morano, 80 Prospect Street, Morano.
Thank you.
I want to first say that Oak Knoll has been a great neighbor to my family. We've lived in the house since 2017. We bought the house after living in Summit for 35 years, knowing that we were buying across from the school. So we've never, had any issues. It's like buying a house and then complaining about your neighbor. Like, that's not
where my husband and I stand on this. We love our relationship with the school. However, and I'm not opposed to any of the buildings being expanded or any of the improvements that they want to make internally. I think the one thing, and I know it's not in my backyard, but it was written in, I think, the attorney's summation that this would not affect real estate values. And one of the things I'd like to ask is, it was written in one of the documents that we received.
I think that was probably a prior resolution. Or, oh, no, that's the memo in support of the application, yes.
I was just wondering, first and foremost, where was that information taken from?
Well, it's consistent with testimony that was given in 2008, or I'd have to look what year it was, but there has been testimony regarding this property and improvements that have been done and how it does not affect the values of neighboring properties.
I think in my case, unfortunately, having to stare at a parking lot with lit up all night long is going to affect my real estate value. And I'm actually a real estate agent, so I can attest to that in a professional way as well as a private citizen. It's just not going to be pleasant from the second floor, the third floor. There's never going to be any trees that can grow high enough to block out the cars that are sitting there. And for the amount of days a year that the spaces get used while they're in school, it seems that it's just excessive for us in a residential area to have to take that on and burden us with that. And that's where I stand on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Serge Masura, yes.
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Serge Masura, M-A-S-Y-R-A, 51 Blackburn Road.
Thank you.
So recently, first of all, I'm all for the improvements as well, okay? But just making them manageable for neighbors in the area. So just to take a step back in my thinking here. Recently, we were at University of Michigan, and we're doing a college visit. And the campus has outgrown its blueprint. So 70% of the students now that are freshmen, incoming freshmen, have to stay 15, 20 minutes away by bus because they've outgrown the blueprint, the footprint of the original campus. That happens. There's a lot of disgruntled parents that when their kids go to University of Michigan, they have to basically 15 minutes away from the main campus. We already know that the lacrosse fields, the soccer fields, and so on are in Chatham. And what I have found now, being my wife and I being, our kids being there for 3 years, is there's an increase of traffic flow in the area. And on Blackburn Place, Blackburn Road, Arnard, all kinds of different parking going on. So we just want to keep the integrity of the area so that it is not chaos. So that's just my point. I think it comes a point where you do outgrow the footprint, and I think we're there now. So it's just like, keep it manageable. Okay? Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Eric Nicely, 56 Blackburn
If
Road,
you could
N-I-C-E-L-Y.
raise your right hand. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
They have been a very good neighbor, and I think what they want to do as far as adding on to the school makes some sense from a building standpoint. I would like to ask, though, that the additional roof that's going to be on the upper school, where the, what I call congregation area would be passed upon, because that actually blocks our view over to the, where you work, and that's an actually nice, better view than actually the roof with all the air conditioners, and another thing would just block our view. So we'd like to potentially not have that in place. We also would like to have some type of process relating to the lighting. The lighting has just gotten much bigger. They're leaving more lights on. Part of it's because of COVID. They need blue lights. those types of things. But I think overall, if we just keep adding lights and we don't have some mechanism to turn them off when there's nobody there, it is going to continue to keep us up or those types of things. And it'd just be better if we could have some type of light plan that works long-term. The other item, just from a standpoint of probably nice to have, is just make sure that the retention actually is working. The people at Larned have had a really hard time and further down to make sure that that water's retained. And then when they get the architectural drawings, I think you need to ask a little bit about how far they drill down, and if they can't go any further, what the plan is to stop versus bringing in dynamite and those types of things. The reason I ask that is you have us storing 12,000 gallons of water in that big garage that's right back there, and if for some reason everything shakes, even though we built everything to your specifications, I really don't want a tidal wave to come down and some little kid happens to drown or something like that. So I just think you ought to think about how far, when they're going through the drilling, whether or not they're shaking the rest of the structures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Sarah Masura, 51 Blackburn Road, Masyra.
Thank you.
I'm super supportive of Oak Knoll as a neighbor of ours and as a school, a religious institution, and I think they absolutely should be able to make improvements to their campus that directly benefit the current students and future students. My biggest issue here is, as a resident of Blackburn Road, is the parking lot that's going to be put in. To me, it seems that this parking lot is being put in to provide seniors more parking. It's a luxury, an absolute luxury. You're gonna take away a green space that fits the neighborhood to let 17-year-olds park there. Let me be clear, I have a 19-year-old, I have an almost 17-year-old, a 14-year-old. I get it, I get it, I get it. We want our kids to drive. I actually don't mind them parking on my street. They park on Blackburn Place up and down the entire way. I don't mind them. They're actually very respectful, they're nice. Rarely is it an issue. I will say, making these spaces to get people off the street, that's not gonna happen. More people are gonna park on the street, more kids are gonna park on the street. I've never once seen a car tag hanging on any car on Blackburn Place ever that denotes it's a senior driving. And again, I'm okay with juniors driving, I'm okay with seniors driving. I just don't think that we need to completely put in a parking lot that directly faces my neighbor's house and adds to congestion in the area to make that improvement. The building improvements, yes. I don't think we need the parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just note for the record that that parking lot is for employees and visitors?
You should arm wrestle for it.
Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And
Nick
please-
Pappas, 96 Prospect Street.
And please
So-
spell your last name.
Pappas.
Thank you.
And I also agree and supporting of the improvements to the school buildings, to the structure. I really disagree with that addition of the parking lot. And I know that we're only looking for a 0.6% coverage variance, but you're already 2% over, so now you're 2.6 total. I think that, creates a tremendous issue with stormwater. I understand their retention basins. I went through this with the town 4 years ago and put a lot of retention in my backyard to make it happen. But at the end of the day, the flooding's getting worse. You're covering more of the land. It's non-permeable over time, and it's just running down the hill to people on Larned. I also think the parking lot with the additional lighting is, the school is a bright, glowing beacon 24/7. The lights never shut off. The current lights around the parking lots are clearly not shielded, because if you do what they said they would do, I would not be seeing them from 500 feet away. And then also when people pull in and out of the parking lot, you can see right through the landscape shrubs. I have a very thick barrier of landscaping in my backyard, large trees, mixed shrubs. My neighbor has green giant arborvitaes. every time he pulls into his driveway, I can see his car lights, he can see mine. So having, 15 cars pointed at our neighbor at night during a school event is just not acceptable for the neighborhood. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you raise your right hand, do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Brad Olson, O-L-S-O-N.
Thank you.
64 Blackburn. Yeah, I noted before that there's a massive amount of flooding that occurs. I lost a car in 2020 in 3 feet of water just down from Larnard. There's already a massive problem. That's one of the worst areas in Summit. And Oak Knoll is going from 41% to 46% lot coverage in this situation, and it's hard to imagine this doesn't contribute further to the flooding problem. One way to mitigate that is to not put in all these parking lots. It is not a benefit, in my opinion, or many of my neighbors, to have the parking lot versus having people park on the street. The parking on the street is fine. The objective of trying to get cars off the street, building parking lots, they're gonna be there 12 months a year, 24 hours a day, with lighting that's gonna disrupt the neighborhood, versus cars being there from, whatever it is, 8 to 3, isn't a trade-off that I'm willing to think is beneficial for the neighborhood. And I think that's a detriment. And I think this board has to really consider the drainage issues that exist, given the flooding that exists for those houses down on Larnard, and how much this continues to contribute to that. Separately, it may have already been decided to, Oak Knoll has pulled it back, but having another curb cut on Blackburn is not something that I think is good for the aesthetics of the neighborhood. The stone wall that you have is very nice. I think you should, integrate that with the landscaping and extend it down towards your new property at 76 Prospect, or your existing property at 76 Prospect. I think that would be beneficial for the area and the neighborhood. I put in a stone wall. I got my neighbor one up from me to put in a stone wall. The Niceleys have a stone wall. It kind of fits the whole thing. There's only one house missing, and that one just turned over, and hopefully they'll do construction. Having a stone wall continue wall really kind of makes the character of our neighborhood. And the last, point I'd just like to make is that I would like, for Oak Knoll to consider more screening in the back of Tisdale Hall there, to the extent possible, given the oaks that are there. It's difficult for us. Beautiful school, and I echo everything else about being a good neighbor. I brought some things up to you, and you addressed them, and I appreciate that. I forget where I was going with it, but
Additional screening. The school will.
yeah, the lighting and so forth, and the windows, and lights are left on. I know people turn it off, but they're left on anyway, and anything you can do. Thank you for helping me finish my sentence.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you.
If you raise your right hand, do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
Yep, it's Isabel Rogers, R-O-D-G-E-R-S, 92 Prospect Street.
Thank you.
I also, this is like not nitpicking on, your plans look beautiful. You guys have excellent, you've hired the best of the best. I think the overarching issue here that's been stated before is like, at what point have you grown out of your current capabilities in a residential neighborhood. And I think that is what is most concerning to me as a neighbor and to other neighbors, as you can tell. The number one thing is that, like, you guys are an institution, and your issue now has become our issue. And in a residential neighborhood, as you can imagine, you don't want parking lot in your backyard. You don't want bright lights on all night. You don't want to have to get new curtains. You don't want to have to be on your patio and see an extremely lit area. So our concern here is that, again, you guys are in school 161 days a year, 8 hours a day. That is 15% of the year. So your issue is now 100% our issue when it's really only 15% of the year. That's a effective every day of our life. In addition, as you guys get these improvements, you're just going to continue growing, which I understand. I would too if I were you guys. A great institution, I understand why you want to keep growing. But in a residential neighborhood, unfortunately, there are confines and more traffic coming in at hours where we have 3 young kids that will be walking to our public school nearby is just overcrowding. So as you guys as a board, I really wish you would take into consideration that 15% of the year for it to help them is greatly affecting the neighbors 100% of the time.
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name.
Bix
Spell your last name.
Ellenbecker, Ellenbeckerer, 92 Prospect.
Thank you.
I don't have really anything clever or new to say than what we already haven't said. I mean, to me, the parking lot's an absolute non-starter, landscaped or not landscaped. It's an absolute non-starter. And I guess we as Summit residents, and I don't mean to lecture, but we're leaning on you guys to make a good trade, because that's what you do. You represent us to make a good trade. And what they're asking for is not a balanced trade. And anyone just logically thinking it all through can understand that throwing this parking lot down there and the building additions, you know, I do have some issues with. But overall, like what they're asking for, there's no give. There just is no give. And it's up to you to represent us to make a good decision. And when you put your head on that pillow tonight, I hope you do. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're done with public comment, so Ms. Alsop, I'll throw it back to you for,
Okay, can I just respond to some of the comments?
absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, for the lighting, I think that the school would obviously be amenable to evaluating the lighting around their school and seeing what they can turn off, seeing what has to be on, seeing if things can go on timers and things like that. So that's number one, where we hear the concerns of the neighbors, and I think that's something that the school obviously will look into and is happy to address. With regard to the stormwater management, we have an expert. He has been qualified by this board as an expert, and he has testified that these improvements that are being made and the stormwater management that's being proposed is going to improve the conditions over and above what currently exists. He's also stated that the maintenance plan will be recorded with Union County to make sure that there's no issues with that stormwater detention moving towards the future. Let's just see. I don't know, Dan, can you just address the drilling and the footings for a second, please?
Yeah, my pleasure, absolutely. So we did do a geotechnical study on the site, essentially various test borings throughout. The only area where we anticipate potentially running into some bedrock would be the lower Connolly addition, but it's at an elevation below the surface of the grade low enough where I can't absolutely guarantee we're not going to do blasting, but it's highly unlikely that there be any blasting that'd be necessary. Probably just some jackhammering, with backhoes and stuff to be able to put the typical spread footing down there. But with the depth of the bedrock that we encountered from our geotechnical borings, we don't anticipate major blasting. And if there was, we could absolutely do vibration monitoring and everything, the performance standards that are required, by the state and the local government to ensure that there be minimal impacts to the surrounding area.
Thank you. Also, the school, obviously, as Ms. Roller testified to, is obviously, will agree to a condition of approval to, you know, add landscaping where we can to help the screening and work with the city forester to make sure that all of those areas that are being improved are sufficiently screened from view from the neighbors. And then I think one of the neighbors said that this is bringing more cars and traffic. The traffic engineer testified that that is not the case. There will be no additional cars coming to the site. It's the same number of cars that have always been coming. It's just they will not be parking on perimeter roadways. They'll be parking on site. It's also not student parking. It is for employees, so that way all the employees can get on site. We have enough visitor spaces, and then it will be for 25 students on campus. So I think that addresses all of the comments, and then I have a summation, if I could.
Please.
Okay. So I want to thank the board for listening to the presentation tonight, and I want to thank the neighbors who have participated in this process for the last 3 years. Oak Knoll School is an inherently beneficial use and an existing permitted conditional use that is further protected by the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000. The courts have determined that when evaluating nonconformities with an inherently beneficial use, 1, the positive criteria is presumptively satisfied, and 2, the negative criteria is evaluated by determining if there are substantial negative impacts or impairments as a direct result of the proposed improvements, and if there are conditions that can be crafted to mitigate those perceived impacts or impairments. Mr. Barry has just demonstrated through his testimony that both the positive and negative criteria has been satisfied, justifying the relief requested as a result of this proposal. I am not going to repeat all of that testimony, but I will focus on the impacts to the neighbors. Those impacts will be a substantial improvement over existing conditions. The additions will match up to the existing heights of the buildings. They have been designed to comply with the city's design guidelines. They have a more residential feel, and for the most part are interior to the site or shielded by other buildings on site. It is also difficult to perceive the additional coverages in FAR from any one spot on site because of the topography with an upper and lower campus and the fact that the buildings are dispersed throughout the site. The stormwater management proposed is in excess of what is required and will account for the additional impervious coverage, I handwrote this, and so it's a little. The stormwater management proposed is in excess of what is required and will more than account for the additional impervious coverage proposed. The plan will also allow the school to retain the captured runoff on site longer, which will reduce peak flow rates and be an improvement over existing conditions. The perimeter views of the property on Larned, Blackburn, and by Tisdale Hall are all being improved with landscaping, and again has agreed to a condition to increase that landscaping. The landscaping on Blackburn will shield the parking area. The landscaping and new fence by Tisdale will screen the new addition and detention basin, and the Larned Road perimeter will be cleaned up and improved dramatically with a new fence and landscaping. This landscaping will act to screen the improvements, beautify the site, and is designed to be consistent with the residential feel of the neighborhood. 72 Prospect Street House is being maintained to keep the existing residential features of the exterior and the property. And I guess we disagree with the neighbors that are here tonight, but the most impactful is the increase of 31 on-site parking spaces, which will reduce the impact of parking on perimeter roads while maintaining the existing circulation patterns. All of these benefits are a direct result of this proposal and will have a substantial positive impact on the surrounding neighborhood and are in furtherance of the goals and objectives outlined in the plan and the master plan of the City of Summit, which include to maintain and upgrade the availability of community resources for residents through modern and efficient facilities, including schools, promoting a desirable visual environment, providing for adequate parking, encouraging the efficient management of stormwater, and encouraging the preservation of historic buildings.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Olson. Due to the late hour, we are not going to go into executive session tonight nor vote on this application. So we are going to carry it to a future date.
I just have a question. So at that future date, will we allow public comment or question at that time, or is it strictly deliberation and a vote?
It'll be executive session and a vote.
Okay. Then we could do February 19th.
20th.
Oh, you're right. Yes, thank you.
What date?
The 20th, February 20th. I had the old date on here.
So in the meantime, Ms. Oles, I would strongly advise you to talk to your clients about amending this application that does not have a parking lot at 76 Prospect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Noted.
Could we also have the, well, I guess that kind of affects the lighting design, because they're supposed to produce a lighting design. Do we have to see that?
I think as long as they've committed to complying with.
Okay.
I would also recommend, to the extent possible, we've talked about evaluating whether the lights can be dimmed, can be turned off at a certain hour on motion sensors. If we could have a proposed condition for lighting on the site by that next hearing, I think that would help us understand what exactly is being proposed there.
Okay.
And I would also ask council to confirm that you're waiving the time frame for the board to act.
Yes.
And I imagine requesting that the matter be carried without notice.
Yes, please.
Excellent. Can I get a motion to carry?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second, whatever.
Okay, then we-
So Don and then Joe second.
Okay, gotcha.
Take your pick.
Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Mr. Malay? Mr. Chanchuli?
Yes.
Mr. Nearing?
Yes.
Chairman Loigan?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay. And we have some business to attend to?
Yes, we have a few resolutions in the minutes. The first resolution we have is for 6 Garden Street. That's Michael and Izumi Shadowski, block 4711, lot 7, ZB-24-2267. The eligible voting members are Chairman Loikitz, Vice Chair Zahn, Mr. Steiner, Mr. Yuko, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Curran, and Ms. Chifo. Can somebody move that?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Chairman Loikitz?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
The motion carries. The next one we have is 230 Oak Ridge Avenue, Thomas and Allison McMillan, block 5106, lot 13. That's ZB-24-2264. I'm sorry, I just want to stop for 1 second. Ms. Oles, do you mind just giving me the exhibits or
Can I
whomever?
email them to you tomorrow?
But I also need the hard copies too. I need both. I have the landscaping ones.
I'm not
Actually,
sure
I
if
don't
we-
have that one. Yeah,
I
that's
don't
the one
think
I
we
was
have all of
missing.
them, So whatever you don't have, I'll make sure that I
Okay.
get you hard.
Thank you, yes. Okay, sorry, I'll continue. The eligible voting members for 230 Oak Ridge are Mr. Steiner, Chairman Loikitz, Mr. Yuko, Mr. Nelson, Vice Chair Zahn, Mr. Curran, and Mr. Malay. Can we have a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
Okay.
It's just you and
Mr.
me.
Steiner,
Yes.
Chairman Loikitz,
Yes.
Mr. Nelson,
Yes.
and Mr. Malay.
Yes.
The motion carries. The last one we have is for 29 Ridge Road. That's Elena Holdings LLC, Block 2201, Lot 25, ZB-24-2245. The eligible voting members are Mr. Steiner, Chairman Loikitz, Mr. Nelson, Vice Chair Zahn, and Ms. Chifo. Can we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll take Mr. Nelson and a second.
Somebody.
Someone? No, it can't be anyone on this side
Oh.
over here, actually, so.
It's you then.
It's gotta be-
So moved. Whatever I
Okay,
just moved.
Second.
that's the second for 29 Ridge. Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Chairman Loikitz?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
The motion carries. And then finally, we have the minutes. I sent them out to you guys earlier today. I hope everyone had a chance to look them over.
So moved.
Who's that?
Me.
Mr. Steiner.
Okay, so Mr. Steiner will move it, and a second,
Second.
Don.
and we'll do a voice vote, but we will exclude Mr. Malay because he wasn't present.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
All those
Whoever.
in favor?
Just leave.
Scott, I need you to, oh, you have everything, and then I have the Mylars.
Okay.